The Celestial Sword Saint's reply stunned Jian Chen. The fact that he could not become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple did not surprise him. What did surprise him was that there were two other people who had completed the Path of Swords. Jian Chen had experienced just how difficult the many tests on the Path of Swords were firsthand. The mental test in the end had affected him drastically. He did not even know if he had passed it successfully. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how exceptional the two other people were. Their talent was no worse than Jian Chen's. Senior Sword Saint, may I ask just how much talent is needed to capture Senior's interest? Jian Chen asked. It's not a matter of talent. You and the two other people who completed the Path of Swords all possess extremely great talent. Barely anyone can match you across the entire Saints world. The reason why you and they were unsuitable was because you all failed the final mental test. You are unsuitable for inheriting my legacy, the Celestial Sword Saint said slowly. His old voice was filled with energy. Jian Chen's heart suddenly sank. He asked, Senior Sword Saint, do you know everything about the illusions we went through at the end? That's not an illusion, but a mental test. It's also known as a test of inner demons. Those with firm wills will keep their hearts as firm as rock when they undergo the test. They won't be affected at all, nor will they show any weaknesses. However, your emotions were far too intense when you underwent the test. As a result, you're not the one I want, said the Celestial Sword Saint. I see, Jian Chen was secretly relieved. At the very least, he was certain that the Celestial Sword Saint had not failed him because of everything he experienced in the illusion. Instead, it was because of his emotions. Since Junior is unsuited to become Senior Sword Saint's disciple, Junior naturally will not keep insisting. However, can this Junior stay here for 3 years? I will leave by myself after those 3 years. Of course, I do have something for Senior. To express my gratitude, this Junior will give Senior Sword Saint this. With that, Jian Chen took out a wooden box. With my cultivation, there's barely anything that can catch my attention in the world. What can you, a mere God King, take out? Of course, unless it's a treasure from the birth of the universe like Fortune Jade. The Celestial Sword Saint was put into a tough spot by Jian Chen's gift. Although this Junior does not know what kind of treasure the Fortune Jade mentioned by Senior Sword Saint is, this Junior does have quite an extraordinary item. As he said that, Jian Chen had already opened the wooden box. Immediately, a heavenly resource appeared. The heavenly resource was of an extremely low grade. It would not even interest regular God Kings, let alone the Celestial Sword Saint who possessed an exceptional cultivation. Suddenly, the Celestial Sword Saint became surprised. In the next moment, the heavenly resource disappeared from Jian Chen's hand and appeared before the Celestial Sword Saint. It's actually Shenhuang Qi. It looks like you found a Shenhuang microcosm, the Celestial Sword Saint said calmly, without any particular emotion at all. It was like even a Shenhuang microcosm was unable to interest him. The Shenhuang microcosm was a place hidden in a lower world. Moreover, it has never been excavated and is of an extremely high grade. This Junior is willing to offer up information about the Shenhuang microcosm, said Jian Chen. He had only explored the outskirts of the Shenhuang microcosm when he was in the Sea Realm in the past. In reality, another world existed within the Shenhuang microcosm. If the region outside that world belonged to mortals, then the region within the world was for immortals. Back then, due to his limited strength, Jian Chen had only moved around the outside of that world. He had never set foot in the domain. If the heavenly resources outside the domain were items for mortals, then the items within the domain were for immortals. They were truly treasures of high quality. Shenhuang microcosms are indeed extremely rare. A Shenhuang microcosm with a boundary is enough to drive many Grand Primes insane. Unfortunately, it's still completely useless to me, the Celestial Sword Saint said calmly. His ancient eyes remained unwavered, and he returned the heavenly resource with Shenhuang Qi back to Jian Chen. He was completely uninterested. Jian Chen was surprised. Was the Celestial Sword Saint really someone who had ascended from mortality, unaffected by materialistic objects, where even a Shenhuang microcosm with a domain was unable to interest him? Jian Chen was troubled now. The peak experts were all waiting for him outside. Once he left the Celestial Sword Saint's territory, it would be impossible for him to evade capture. The Celestial Sword Saint's territory was the only safe place for him right now. Although he also knew about the cavern hidden in the depths of the desolate plain, so many peak experts were eyeing him closely right now. If he really did go there, it was basically asking for trouble. But for the sake of the Empyrean Demon Lord, I can let you stay here for 3 years, but it will only be 3 years. After those 3 years, leave by yourself, the Celestial Sword Saint said at this moment. The Empyrean Demon Lord? Jian Chen revealed his doubts when he heard that. He did not know Mo Tianyun was the Empyrean Demon Lord right now. After all, when he helped Mo Tianyun destroy the formation so that his original body could break through, he had suffered the backlash from the chaotic force. He was close to death, having lost all sense of the outside world. He did not hear the bellows of the Saint of Grand Harmony. The Empyrean Demon Lord is the person who gave you that mask. He's also the great elder of the Empyrean Demon Cult, said the Celestial Sword Saint. Afterwards, with a wave of his hand, Jian Chen immediately felt the landscape around him change. He had been sent to a gloomy cave by a force so powerful that he could not resist. The great elder of the Empyrean Demon Cult is actually Senior Mo Tianyun. However, Jian Chen paid no attention to the changes around him. He stood within the gloomy cave as he felt like his head was in a mess. He had heard far too many rumors about the legendary great elder of the Empyrean Demon Cult, but he had never thought that the great elder was actually a legendary figure of the Tianyuan continent in the past, Mo Tianyun. The experts gathered once again in the ruined city, around the path of swords that reached towards the sky. They stared at the end with ugly faces. Jian Chen has actually vanished from the path of swords. Has he passed the Celestial Sword Saint's tests and become his disciple? Impossible. That's definitely impossible. Let's go to where the Celestial Sword Saint cultivates and get to the bottom of this. The peak experts gathered there, all left with sunken faces. They had banded together, heading to the Celestial Sword Saint's territory simultaneously. The Celestial Sword Saint cultivated at the Sword God Mountains. The peak experts from various places banded together and arrived outside the Sword God Mountains. There was not a single protective formation to be seen in the mountain range, making it seem like anyone could set foot in there. However, none of the peak experts there dared to enter the boundary of the Sword God Mountains without permission. They all remained outside the Sword God Mountains. They looked at the depths of the Sword God Mountains as they showed deep fearfulness and dread, along with some temptation to retreat. However, when they saw that so many other peak experts stood with them, they eased up slightly. These people did not come here to ask for the person they wanted from the Celestial Sword Saint. They just felt rather regretful and had come to see whether Jian Chen had really become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. It shouldn't be that easy for Jian Chen to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple, said the Hall Elder of the God Clan, Tyne. She happened to be among the group as well. Adriana stood beside Tyne. Adriana stared straight at the Sword God Mountains as she remained silent. Completing the Path of Swords is only an opportunity to become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. It guarantees nothing. Jian Chen is a member of the martial soul lineage, so it's unlikely for the Celestial Sword Saint to accept him as his disciple, said the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire firmly. Jian Chen is someone that my master has specifically requested for. It's best if the Celestial Sword Saint hasn't accepted him as his disciple, said Tu San from the Heaven-Splitting clan coldly. The Celestial Sword Saint was very powerful, but he had the support of the Heaven-Splitting ancestor, so he was extremely confident in facing the Celestial Sword Saint. Afterwards, Tu San clasped his fist towards the Sword God Mountains and said sternly, I am Tu San, and I come from the Heaven-Splitting clan. Greetings to Senior Celestial Sword Saint. Tu San's voice was thunderous, booming and echoing through the entire Sword God Mountains. The peak experts there all held their breaths, looking at the depths of the Sword God Mountains as they waited for a reply from the Celestial Sword Saint. I already know why you've all come. I've allowed Jian Chen to stay on the Sword God Mountains for 3 years. After those 3 years, he will leave by himself. He will no longer have any connections with me. The Celestial Sword Saint's voice rang out from the depths of the Sword God Mountains. He did not pay any special attention to Tu San. Instead, he announced this information to all the experts gathered there. Tu San's expression immediately became rather ugly when he saw how the Celestial Sword Saint had ignored him. After all, he had mentioned the Heaven-Splitting clan. His visit this time was not a personal affair. It was under the name of the Heaven-Splitting clan. It was fine if the Celestial Sword Saint ignored him, but he even ignored the Heaven-Splitting clan. Tu San found this to be rather humiliating. The other peak experts all became relieved. They began to discuss with each other secretly. It looks like Jian Chen hasn't become the Celestial Sword Saint's disciple. The Celestial Sword Saint is letting him stay for 3 years, probably as a reward for completing the Path of Swords. That's what I was saying. Who do you think the Celestial Sword Saint is? How would it be that easy for Jian Chen to become his disciple? 3 years. If that's the case, I'll just wait another 3 years. Elder, what should we do next? Should we discuss with Senior Celestial Sword Saint so that he will let us take Jian Chen away after the 3 years? Directly taking him back to the Godnigma plane through the teleportation formations in the Sword God Mountains? Adriana also asked secretly. Tyne shook her head. With the Celestial Sword Saint's temperament, it's unlikely for him to agree. We can only wait here for 3 years and come up with another idea once Jian Chen emerges from the Sword God Mountains. The problem is that there's the Heaven-Splitting Clan, and who knows why the Heaven-Splitting Clan wants Jian Chen so much. It'll be troublesome. Tyne's brows furrowed as she seemed slightly worried. She said, before our war god completely matures, we can't declare war on the Heaven-Splitting Clan. Although the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor can't do anything to us on the Godnigma plane, we can't always stay there. We need to go to other places. We won't be the Heaven-Splitting Clan's opponent elsewhere. That's because our God Clan still doesn't have an expert who can fend off the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor. And what is the Heavenly Palace of Bishing thinking? They should have received news of the Anata Tower a long time ago, but why have they still not sent someone to retrieve it? If the Heavenly Palace of Bishing sends someone, all of Jian Chen's problems will be resolved, including the threat from the Heaven-Splitting Clan, Tyne sighed inside. She had no idea what the Heavenly Palace of Bishing was planning. Adriana's heart sank. She had already realized that it would probably become a difficult matter again in 3 years' time. At the same time, all 7 members of the Martial Soul lineage gathered on the illusionary Martial Soul Mountain under Hun Zhang's lead in outer space. 3 years. We still have 3 years. Chu Jian, Yu Chao. You two return to the Martial Soul Mountain first so that you can prepare. I'll stay for now and find a chance to meet Jian Chen. After 3 years, we have to do everything we can to take Jian Chen back to the Martial Soul Mountain. When we're on the Martial Soul Mountain, probably no one can threaten us unless the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor personally takes action, Hun Zhang said to the 6 other members sternly. Then you have to be careful of Yu Chen, just in case he's scheming something, Chu Jian warned sternly. Don't worry. Although Yu Chen overwhelms me in terms of cultivation, he'll definitely be the one who dies in a battle to the death. Hun Zhang was confident. Tu San's face became rather sunken outside the Sword God Mountains. Celestial Sword Saint, Jian Chen is someone my master wants. My master has already grown very impatient from all the years Jian Chen spent hiding. Do you plan on making my master wait another 3 years? Tu San directly brought up the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor. He believed that only the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor could strike awe in the heart of the Celestial Sword Saint now. After all, the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor was a peak expert on the same level as the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. He was only a step away from Grand Exalt. Tu San refused to believe that the Celestial Sword Saint could stand up to him. I don't want to repeat what I just said. No matter who it is, you won't be able to take away anything from me in the next 3 years, the Celestial Sword Saint replied powerfully. He seemed to be utterly fearless. The expressions of the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains all changed when they heard that. They stared at the depths of the Sword God Mountains in surprise. The Celestial Sword Saint actually did not even respect the Heaven-Splitting Sword Saint? Although the Celestial Sword Saint was known for having things his way and never negotiating, he had gone a little too far this time. Tu San's face darkened from anger. He roared out, Celestial Sword Saint, you better think about the consequences of what you just said. The response he received was a flash. The surroundings suddenly darkened, and an extremely resplendent streak of light shot out from the depths of the Sword God Mountains. The streak of light moved with unbelievable speed, making distance seem like a completely negligible concept. It arrived in a single instance, sweeping through San Tuesday. It was fast, far too fast. Even the peak experts there could not react to it. San Tu's head had already been separated from his body. It was thrown high into the air as blood sprayed out, dyeing the sky red. The sudden occurrence shocked all the peak experts around Tu San. They all pulled away from Tu San as they experienced emotional turmoil. In that moment, many people felt their heads blank out. They could not believe what had just happened before them. The celestial sword saint had beheaded Tu San with a single stroke. It had to be mentioned that Tu San had the support of the heaven-splitting ancestor, someone who was only second to Grand Exalts. Celestial sword saint, why? Why? Tu San's head called out in fright in the air. He knew that if the celestial sword saint wanted to kill him, he would have died long ago. It would have been impossible for his soul to survive. Afterwards, his head rapidly joined up with his body, becoming one again. These are the consequences you speak of. The celestial sword saint's response rang out in an awe-inspiring manner. He was completely fearless. Tu San heard a naked provocation from the celestial sword saint's words, making him both surprised and furious. He pointed at the sword god mountains as his lips trembled, but he did not dare to utter a single word. At this moment, the endless sea of clouds above the sword god mountains suddenly began to churn violently. At the same time, an indescribably tremendous pressure enveloped the entire desolate plain. An extremely terrifying will had crossed through outer space, descending upon the desolate plain. The arrival of the will made the entire desolate plain tremble slightly. Everything fell silent and began to shake in fear. It's the heaven-splitting ancestor? The heaven-splitting ancestor's will has descended. The peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains were all stern. They pulled away from the Sword God Mountains as they looked at the sky fearfully. Master, you finally came. Tu San was overjoyed. The personal arrival of the heaven-splitting ancestor made his confidence swell. He became fearless, and his vexation caused by the celestial sword saint evaporated in the blink of an eye. Master, I was almost slain by the celestial sword saint's sword. This celestial sword saint doesn't even plan on showing you any respect. Tu San fanned the flames, pleading for his master to teach the celestial sword saint a firm lesson. Celestial sword saint, you've gone a little far. A tremendous voice boomed out through the surroundings. The mist and clouds churned before condensing into a figure that stood tens of thousand meters high. The facial features of the figure were very clear. He seemed lifelike. He was a man who seemed to be in his 30s. Even though his appearance was nothing special, he possessed a supreme bearing. He seemed undaunting, causing even the entire desolate plain to shake below everyone's feet. This person's arrival seemed to replace the world there, becoming the only god present. The laws of the world began to revolve around him. They were under his control. The celestial sword saint remained seated on the Sword God Mountains. His ancient figure was like a mountain, completely immovable. He stared beyond the Sword God Mountains calmly, looking at the heaven-splitting ancestor condensed from the mist and clouds. He was completely calm, showing no particular emotion at all. At the same time, Jian Chen emerged from a gloomy cave elsewhere in the Sword God Mountains. He became extremely stern as he stared at the huge figure outside. Even though he did not recognize this person, he could already guess their identity. Why does the heaven-splitting ancestor want to take me away? Jian Chen felt very curious. After all, he had no ties with the heaven-splitting clan. Why had a supreme figure like the heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly started paying attention to him? Although a supreme god king had passed away in the Neptunian divine palace, he refused to believe that the heaven-splitting ancestor would step forward personally for the supreme god king. After all, the heaven-splitting clan was not the solitary sword lineage. Mo Chang was the only successor of the solitary sword lineage apart from the solitary sword ancestor, so his death naturally alarmed the solitary sword ancestor. On the other hand, the heaven-splitting clan was huge. The heaven-splitting ancestor probably did not even know the name of the supreme god king who died in the Neptunian divine palace. Moreover, the supreme god king had died to Ming Dong's hands. Jian Chen was not the one who killed him. There were even fewer reasons for the heaven-splitting ancestor to pay attention to him. Jian Chen's thoughts wandered, but he could not understand why. At this moment, the heaven-splitting ancestor took action. He directly sent a palm strike towards the Sword God Mountains with his huge figure condensed from mist and clouds. With that, space collapsed and the ground trembled. The orderly laws all became chaotic as devastating power pressed towards the celestial sword saint on the Sword God Mountains. The power was just too terrifying. It had surpassed the limits that space could endure. Even the tiniest slivers of power that leaked out was enough to make space collapse. The expressions of the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains all changed in shock when they sensed the power of the palm strike. You want to deal with me just with your will? Heaven-splitting ancestor, you underestimate me far too much. The celestial sword saint was immovable on the sword god mountains. He remained seated on the ground and did not stand up, but a powerful sword intent gathered on him. Afterwards, he extended a finger, and immediately, it shone with blinding light. All the laws of the sword in the surroundings seemed to gather at the finger, shooting out as a strand of sword chi that shone like a galaxy. The sword chi tore through the air, leaving behind a trailing streak of darkness. It pierced through the surroundings. The sword chi collided with the heaven-splitting ancestor's misty hand. The expected boom did not come. The sword chi directly punched through the hand, tearing through it in an unstoppable manner before directly flying towards the huge figure of the heaven-splitting ancestor. The will from the heaven-splitting ancestor was unable to deal with the celestial sword saint's sword chi. Wherever the sword chi passed by, the heaven-splitting ancestor's figure rapidly collapsed. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-splitting ancestor's arm vanished, and the celestial sword saint's sword chi directly punched through his huge body. Immediately, the heaven-splitting ancestor's body shook and began to blur. He had almost collapsed. The three-live sword intent. It really is the three-live sword intent. The mighty voice of the heaven-splitting ancestor boomed out as his eyes shone brightly. He stared at the celestial sword saint in interest. What? The three-live sword intent. All the peak experts outside the Sword God Mountains cried out in response to the heaven-splitting ancestor's words. No wonder. No wonder the celestial sword saint doesn't even fear the heaven-splitting ancestor. Turns out he obtained the three-live sword god's legacy. Tyne sighed in amazement in the crowd. The three-live sword god was a sovereign of the world from the last aeon. He was a grand exalt who specialized in the way of the sword. Over 1,000,000 years ago, the place where the three-live sword god passed away was discovered. When all the experts of the saints' world arrived there, it was already empty. The legacy was gone, and no one knew who obtained it. It looks like the celestial sword saint is the one who received the three-live sword god's legacy. A peak expert sighed in amazement with mixed feelings. The celestial sword saint actually has a grand exalt's legacy, and a grand exalt who specializes in the way of the sword. No wonder he's so powerful. I just wonder if he has grasped the authority of the grand exalt. The authority of the grand exalt is truly an invincible technique that instills despair in opponents. It would be impolite of me to not return the favor. My Sword God Mountains is not a place that anyone can trample, the celestial sword saint said coldly from the Sword God Mountains. A sword hovered above his head, shining with blinding light that illuminated the entire sky. In the next moment, the sword seemed to fuse with the celestial sword saint. With his power and will, it shot off and vanished from the desolate plain. On the Nine Clouds plain on the other side of the universe, the white-robed heaven-splitting ancestor sat leisurely within a pavilion inside the heaven-splitting clan that stood supreme on the Nine Clouds plain. He raised his head slightly and looked at the sky above him. At this moment, the sky above the heaven-splitting clan ripped open. A sword churning with a terrifying glow directly shot towards the heaven-splitting clan. It was fast, far too fast. The sword seemed to have crossed over from a completely different world. The moment it appeared, it shone with dazzling light, shooting towards the ground with unbelievable speed. Immediately, sword intent permeated the surroundings. It was terrifying and boundless, enveloping the entire Nine Clouds plain. The ancient existences who cultivated in seclusion across the Nine Clouds plain were all alarmed. They looked towards the sword chi and became shocked. What terrifying sword chi! It's the celestial sword saint of the desolate plain. It's the celestial sword saint. The celestial sword saint has actually attacked the heaven-splitting clan. He's insane. The heaven-splitting ancestor is a peak expert only second to grand exalts. Has the celestial sword saint reached a point where he doesn't even fear the heaven-splitting ancestor? The sword crossed through such a distance and directly attacked the Nine Clouds plain from the desolate plain. The celestial sword saint is even more terrifying than I imagined him to be. Various peak experts sighed in amazement in places across the Nine Clouds plain. They hovered in the air, staring at the heaven-splitting clan from afar. A protective formation rose up from the heaven-splitting clan, enveloping the entire place. The heaven-splitting ancestor had suddenly vanished from the pavilion as well. When he reappeared, he was outside the formations, standing in the path that the sword would pass through. The heaven-splitting ancestor's bearing was otherworldly. Even though he did not give off any presence at all as he hovered in the air, he seemed like he controlled the world and could determine everything in the world. It was as if he stood above the world, surpassing everything. It was like he had become a part of the ways of the world, enough to change how they functioned. Of course, that was only a feeling, a bearing that appeared when one's comprehension of the laws of the world reached an extremely profound level. He was only a step away from becoming a part of the heavenly ways. The flow of time on the entire Nine Clouds plain seemed to become abnormally slow. After the heaven-splitting ancestor's appearance in the air, the flow of time on the Nine Clouds plain seemed to be affected. The laws of the world seemed to undergo some kind of change, making the celestial sword saint's sword seemingly slow down. The laws where the heaven-splitting ancestor stood seemed to change with his existence. With a thought, he could affect the order of the world. With a thought, he could construct new laws. With a word, he could turn an entire region into his own territory. He was extremely powerful. This was the power of someone only second to grand exalts. However, the celestial sword saint was not weak either. His sword bore his power and will, so it seemed like the celestial sword saint had personally arrived. The laws of the sword condensed on the sword clashed with a heaven-splitting ancestor. Swish! Like a galaxy, the sword shot through the air, passing through all obstructions to arrive above the heaven-splitting ancestor's head. No matter how the heaven-splitting ancestor controlled the ways of the world to interfere with it, it was futile. A gleam of light flashed through the eyes of the heaven-splitting ancestor. His face did not change, and he remained composed. He raised his hand slowly. He seemed to perform this action slowly, but it was actually extremely fast. This was a phenomenon from the interfered laws of space and time. In a single instance, the heaven-splitting ancestor caught the celestial sword saint's sword. Power and laws condensed on the heaven-splitting ancestor's hand, surrounding the sword. Afterwards, the heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly clenched his hand. Immediately, the light of the laws appeared, and all the power in the surroundings seemed to fuse into his hand. Devastating power condensed in a single instance as he wanted to clamp down on the celestial sword saint's sword. The sword exploded with light at that moment. The celestial sword saint's figure seemed to appear, and the sword intent from the three live sword gods suddenly erupted, engaging in an intense clash with the heaven-splitting ancestor. Boom! A deep rumble rang out in the air. Two supreme powers clashed together, causing the laws to tremor. The sword chi on the sword shattered, scattering into the surroundings as countless densely packed streaks. They cut through space, raining down on the ground with a power that could seemingly annihilate everything. Crack! The heaven-splitting ancestor called out, and it seemed to represent the will of the heavenly ways. Once he said that, spatial cracks appeared out of nowhere. They were dense, and they blotted out the sky. It was a shocking, frightening, and extremely grand sight. It seemed like the entire sky was collapsing. Every crack appeared where the scattering sword chi had to pass through like a huge gaping mouth. All the scattered sword chi vanished after shooting into the cracks. In the end, all the sword chi was devoured. The devastating rain had been easily nullified just like that. The celestial sword saint's sword flew out from the heaven-splitting ancestor's hand. It continued to shine blindingly and ripped open the space on the Nine Clouds plain before vanishing. The sword had retreated after a single strike. It did not launch a second attack. The heaven-splitting ancestor remained calm. He stared at the departing sword and did not take action. At a closer glance, one would notice that a faint bloody mark had appeared on his hand. The heaven-splitting ancestor, someone only second to grand exalts, had actually been injured by the celestial sword saint's attack. Even though it was nothing major, just a scratch, it was shocking enough. Celestial sword saint, since you've obtained the three live sword gods' legacy, I'll give it to you. I'll wait the 3 years, said the heaven-splitting ancestor slowly and calmly as he stared at where the sword had vanished. He was emotionless. As he said that, the huge figure condensed from the sea of clouds from when his will descended spoke the same words on the distant desolate plain. Not only did the yielding of the heaven-splitting ancestor surprise all the peak experts on the Nine Clouds plain, but even the peak experts who were about to watch how the heaven-splitting ancestor would overwhelm the celestial sword saint on the Sword God Mountains became utterly astounded. The celestial sword saint had almost collapsed the heaven-splitting ancestor's body of clouds. Not only was this a provocation, but it was also a humiliating matter to the heaven-splitting ancestor, who was one of the most powerful beings below grand exalts. However, he actually did not pursue the matter. This surprised all of them. It looks like the celestial sword saint has already become so powerful that he needs to be taken seriously by the heaven-splitting ancestor. The celestial sword saint has obtained a grand exalt's legacy. Although he might not be able to become a Grand Exalt himself, he'll be able to reach the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor's level at the very least. The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor clearly doesn't want to offend the Celestial Sword Saint over a small matter like this. Indeed, offending an expert like that over a small matter is indeed not a clever decision. Very soon, the peak experts of the two planes seem to understand the hidden meaning behind the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor's actions. Even the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor had yielded, so the peak experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains no longer stuck around. All of them dispersed. Most of them did not leave the desolate plain. Instead, they waited patiently across the desolate plain, waiting for Jian Kem to emerge from the Sword God Mountains in 3 years' time. However, Tu San of the Heaven-Splitting Clan chose to leave, returning to the Heaven-Splitting Clan on the Nine Clouds Plain through a teleportation formation. The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor remained seated in the pavilion. His eyes were closed as he gave off the presence of laws. He seemed to have fused with the surroundings, affecting the operation of the laws there at all times. Before him stood Tu San, who had just returned from the desolate plain. He reported everything that happened during his trip to the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor. He told the complete truth, without any exaggeration at all. He did not dare to tell a single lie before the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor. With the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor's level of cultivation, he could see through the mysteries of the world and peer into the past and future with a single thought. Once Tu San told even half a lie or made a slight exaggeration, the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor would be able to know instantly. The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor opened his eyes after listening to Tu San's report. His gaze was as deep as the cosmos as he said indifferently, "It's not your fault that you weren't able to bring back Jian Chen successfully. In the beginning, I only thought Jian Chen was an insignificant person. I never thought that he would actually be very extraordinary. He's a mere god king, yet I can't peer into anything that has to do with him. That rarely happens. I've developed some interest in him as well. Master, this one will definitely bring back Jian Chen in 3 years' time," Tu San said politely. "All right," nodded the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor. After a slight pause he said, "Originally, I didn't take the Celestial Sword Saint seriously, but since he has obtained the 3 live Sword God's legacy, the situation has changed completely. Although it'll be very difficult for him to become a Grand Exalt in the future, he'll still be able to reach my current level through the legacy alone. There's no need to gain a lurking enemy just because of 3 years. Master is wise." Tu San had already understood this. The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor said after the slightest moment of hesitation. Most importantly, his battle prowess has already far surpassed his current level of cultivation. Defeating him is nothing difficult, but I have no confidence in killing him. He knows the secret techniques of Grand Exalts. If he concentrates on running, it'll be very difficult for me to capture him. Moreover, he already has the ability to harm me now. What? Tu San was in shock. He cried out, "Master T, that's impossible. If he didn't have the 3 live Sword God's legacy, he obviously wouldn't be able to harm me. You can't underestimate a Grand Exalt's legacy." The Heaven-Splitting Ancestor looked at the distant outer space as his gaze deepened. There was a slash that had almost cut through his entire right hand. Even though the wound had closed, a mark still remained. "You are dismissed. Go to the desolate plain again in 3 years' time. You have to bring me Jian Chen this time. I want to see exactly why he's special and why I can't peer into anything about him." Tu San bowed politely before backing away slowly. Soon after Tu San's departure, an ancient voice rang out. "Heaven-Splitting Ancestor, the Little Master wants me to ask you when Jian Chen will be brought here." It was the voice of the artifact spirit of the Neptunian Divine Palace. "Tell your Little Master not to worry. Jian Chen is very safe right now. She'll be able to see him in 3 years' time," the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor said indifferently. Jian Chen looked at the Celestial Sword Saint who sat on the ground with his back towards him in the Sword God Mountains. He bowed deeply and said, "Thank you for assisting me, Senior." Jian Chen understood that the Celestial Sword Saint had actually clashed with the Heaven-Splitting Ancestor because of him earlier. This shocked him. Even though he knew that this was all because of the Celestial Sword Saint's natural pride, the matter had still arisen from him. "You don't need to thank me. Since I have agreed that you can stay on the Sword God Mountains for 3 years, you will definitely be spending those 3 years here. No more, no less. In 3 years' time, leave by yourself. Your life will be in your own hands then," the Celestial Sword Saint said calmly. However, His voice did seem to possess a sense of power that could not be defied. It was as if his words were the edict of heaven, where no one could change his will or decisions. Be careful about the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting ancestor has become interested in you. No matter what you hear in the future, never go to the heaven-splitting clan. The heaven-splitting is hell, not heaven for you, the celestial sword saint said mysteriously, as if he knew almost everything in the world. Jian Chen's heart sank slightly. Junior understands. You can go. You don't need to worry about anyone launching a sneak attack on you in my Sword God Mountains. You can cultivate it at ease. If there are any areas in cultivation that you don't understand, you can come here whenever you like, the celestial sword saint said slowly. He closed his eyes, and he gave off a profound presence, resonating with the world and seemingly fusing with the entire mountain range. It felt like he had become the Sword God Mountains, perfectly merging with every inch of the land there. They seemed inseparable. Afterwards, Jian Chen entered seclusion at ease in the Sword God Mountains. Only the laws of creation, the laws of fire, and the laws of corrosion from the 7 laws he had received from below the desolate plain required more comprehension. I have to raise my comprehension of these 3 laws to God King in the 3 years that I have. Jian Chen secretly made up his mind as he sat in the gloomy cave. However, he could not use the fortune jade now, so his rate of comprehension was obviously much slower. As a result, he did not have complete confidence in completing the required comprehension in 3 years. He temporarily tossed aside his thoughts about the Grand Exalt's cultivation method he had obtained from the Tower of Radiance. His priority right now was to comprehend the 3 laws. This was because only when the 8 laws from the 8 experts within the cavern had been comprehended to God King could the final strands of vital energy within them be activated, allowing all of them to fuse their powers together and deliver an astonishing strike. Jian Chen had no idea how powerful these 8 experts were when they were still alive, but there was one thing he could be certain about, and that was the cavern definitely would not be able to endure a combined attack from the 8 of them. By then, the cavern would definitely collapse, and the corpse of the ancient Great Apes expert would be exposed. The desolate plain would definitely plunge into chaos. Jian Chen began to cultivate, focusing on comprehending the laws of creation, fire, and corrosion. The law he picked first was the laws of fire. The laws of fire was an extremely powerful law for attack. Once he comprehended the laws of fire to God King, it would increase his battle prowess slightly at the very least. As Jian Chen comprehended the laws of fire, the celestial sword saint who sat on a mountain peak suddenly opened his eyes. He glanced at Jian Chen's location. His expression did not change at all. He calmly said, "He has already gained the bearing of a sword immortal. If he continues to comprehend it, it's extremely likely for him to reach sword immortal within the 3 years. However, he hasn't chosen the way of the sword but the laws of fire instead. It looks like he really plans on doing it." A gleam of light flashed through the celestial sword saint's eyes. His eyes became extremely deep in that instance, and he murmured, "That's the secret setup of Blood Tear. If he really does do that, he'll draw out Blood Tear. However, his true crisis doesn't come from Blood Tear. Whatever, I'll just let him toil about." In the blink of an eye, Jian Chen had already been cultivating in the Sword God Mountains for over a month. He roused after that time, and he frowned slightly. He was in a bad mood. Without the fortune jade, his comprehension of laws became extremely slow. Even though it would still seem unbelievably fast in the eyes of others, it was impossible for him to comprehend the laws of creation, fire, and corrosion to God King in just 3 years. The fortune jade is just too precious. As a result, I can't use it, even if I'm inside the Anatta Tower. After all, the celestial sword saint is just too powerful. He's far greater than most grand primes. I'm still not completely certain that the Anatta Tower can stop the senses of the celestial sword saint's soul. After all, the Anatta Tower is damaged right now. It no longer possesses the defenses it had when it was in perfect condition, worried Jian Chen. Fortunately, Kaya has grasped the laws of creation and fire already. I'll comprehend the laws of corrosion first. I hope Kaya's laws of creation and fire will be useful when I need them. Very soon, Jian Chen made up his mind. Just when he was about to continue cultivating, he suddenly sensed something and looked outside the cave. It was also at this moment that 2 figures walked in from outside together. Jian Chen's eyes narrowed, and he was taken by surprise when he saw the 2 figures. They happened to be the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall and Hunzong of the martial soul lineage. I've already been waiting outside for a month. You finally roused, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall said as soon as he entered the cave. He stared at Jian Chen with mixed feelings. He cut right to the chase and said, Jian Chen, I hope you can return that to me. As long as you return that, I won't look into the other matters. Jian Chen understood that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had come for the method of the Exalted Saint. However, he had obtained the method of the Exalted Saint after great effort and difficulty, and it was something that he needed. He had obtained it completely thanks to his own abilities, so how could he just return it? You won't look into the other matters? Humph, Yu Qin. You better listen up. I would like to ask you if you're bold enough to look into them, Hunzong said mockingly as soon as the leader of the Radiant Saint Master had finished talking. He did not even look at Yu Cheng and his ugly expression. Instead, he looked at Jian Chen encouragingly. He smiled. Jian Chen, don't worry. This is the Sword God Mountains. The Celestial Sword Saint permitted us to meet you, which was quite a joyous surprise. If he dares to touch you here, he'll definitely end up biting off more than he can chew, so you don't need to be afraid of him. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall snorted coldly and sighed, and he looked at Hunzong icily. However, it was just as Hunzong had said. He was indeed not bold enough to make a move in the Sword God Mountains, or it would have been impossible for him to stand so close to his arch-nemesis Hunzong. Jian Chen, I understand you a little. I know you're a person who places emphasis on ties of friendships. You might not know it, but your teacher, the Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Xian, and Bai Yu, who you've cared for so much, along with Donglin Yanxue, will all be pulled into this because of you. Strict punishments await them. Donglin Yanxue's punishment will be especially severe. She clearly knew that you were a member of the martial soul lineage, yet not only did she not report you, but she even assisted you in escaping, making our Radiant Saint Hall lose our greatest treasure. Her sins are so great that dismissing her as chosen saint is nowhere enough. Even execution will be regarded as a light punishment, said the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall coldly. He never wanted to do this, but the Grand Exalt's cultivation method was just too important to the Radiant Saint Hall. He would do everything within his ability to take it back. Leader, are you threatening me? Jian Chen's face gradually darkened. He said coldly, let's ignore the fact that I obtained the cultivation method through my abilities alone for now. Your Radiant Saint Hall should be grateful and not resentful towards me for the appearance of the cultivation method in the first place, as I am the reason why the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance awakened. It was also because of me that the hidden miniature world opened up, and it is all because of me that the Grand Exalt's legacy underneath the steel appeared. Moreover, I only obtained the cultivation method within the legacy. Everything else is still with your Radiant Saint Hall. They were obtained by the descendant of the Grand Exalt, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak. If it weren't for me, the Tower of Radiance would remain the same as before, filled with endless mist. It would be impossible for it to become like now, a place that protects all Radiant Saint Masters. As a result, your Radiant Saint Hall should be thankful towards me. I eliminated a huge threat for your Radiant Saint Hall. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's face changed time and time again as he listened to Jian Chen's words. He stared right at Jian Chen with a shocking gaze and said sternly, why did the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance awaken because of you? Perhaps it is because I can control martial soul force, Jian Chen said ambiguously. Obviously, he would not reveal the fact that the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance was no longer the same one as before. The ties between the martial soul lineage and the Radiant Saint Hall runs extremely deep, whether good or bad. I don't know the exact details, but I do know that there needs to be martial soul force to obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy, as one cannot overcome the final juncture of the steel forcefully. Only martial soul force can get through the final obstruction and release the Grand Exalt's legacy suppressed below it. Jian Chen stared at the leader of the Radiant Saint Master with shining eyes and continued, martial soul force is crucial for obtaining the Grand Exalt's legacy. Impossible. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall stressed every single syllable. He refused to accept this. Leader, perhaps you should ask the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. I don't know the exact details, but he should, said Jian Chen. Now that the artifact spirit had fused with some memories, he should be able to answer a few questions. I will be back. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall glanced at Jian Chen deeply. He turned around and left with that. Martial Soul Force was crucial to comprehending the diagram and obtaining the Grand Exalt's legacy. This news was simply far too shocking, and it had completely toppled the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's thinking and understanding. He needed to return and ask the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance closely. Only Jian Chen and Han Zong remained in the slightly gloomy cave after the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's departure. As he looked at Han Zong, who stood just like an ordinary person, Jian Chen's feelings became rather mixed. Before, he and Han Zong were complete strangers. They had no ties at all, yet they were brought together because of Martial Soul Force. However, in order to help him escape from danger, Han Zong had even gone as far as to offend so many peak experts without any hesitation, paying no regard to the consequences. His actions had touched Jian Chen deeply. This was because Jian Chen could clearly sense that Han Zhang's intentions were completely different from the others. The other experts all acted on their desires, wanting to take the Anata Tower for themselves. However, Han Zong had no interest in the Anata Tower at all. His only reason for coming to the desolate plain was to fetch him. Even the 6 other members of the Martial Soul lineage had come to the desolate plain, all gathering in outer space and supporting Han Zong. The actions of the Martial Soul lineage had changed Jian Chen's opinion of them. At this moment, Han Zong coughed gently and said, "The primary reason why I've come to see you this time is to discuss the matter in 3 years' time. You can only stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years. You'll be very safe during that period, but after the 3 years, you'll be directly tossed into a storm. It'll be extremely dangerous. As a result, we need to properly consider how we're going to break out of the encirclement and leave this place." Right now, Chu Jian and the 5 others have already returned to the Martial Soul Mountain. They are making preparations for the Mountain Soul to descend with even greater power in 3 years' time. However, the power of the Martial Soul Mountain cannot directly connect with the desolate plain. It can only descend in outer space, so the greatest problem we face is making it off the desolate plain and onto the Mountain Soul while we face the obstructions of all these experts. As long as we make it onto the Mountain Soul, we can use the connection between the Mountain Soul and the Martial Soul Mountain to cross the tremendous distance, returning to the Martial Soul Mountain in a single instance. Are you really not afraid of offending all those peak experts just for me? Jian Chen looked at Han Zong brightly. You're the 8th brother of our Martial Soul lineage. You're a part of our family. It's no problem even if we have to go up against the world if we can take you back to the Martial Soul Mountain, Han Zong said heroically. In that moment, he seemed to fear nothing. Can the Martial Soul Mountain stop the heaven-splitting ancestor? Jian Chen asked. He had already learned from the Celestial Sword Saint that the heaven-splitting ancestor had developed an interest in him. This interest was not a good matter. As a result, he had to consider the existence of the heaven-splitting ancestor. Han Zong became stern with the mentioning of the heaven-splitting ancestor. He said, "The Martial Soul Mountain indeed cannot stop an expert like the heaven-splitting ancestor. However, it'll still require quite some effort if the heaven-splitting ancestor wants to intrude on the Martial Soul Mountain. After all, he is one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalts. As long as Grand Exalts don't appear, he is the strongest. There aren't a lot of places that can stop experts like that across the entire Saints world. However, with the heaven-splitting ancestor status, it's unlikely for him to take personal action just for you." Jian Che understood. After a moment of thought, he said, "I have my plans in 3 years' time. You don't need to come to the desolate plain." "You have your plans?" Han Zong was surprised. Jian Chen was only a god king, so how would he be able to avoid so many peak experts? If no accidents happen, something major will happen on the desolate plain in 3 years' time. At that time, I will find a way off the desolate plain, so you don't need to come, said Jian Chen. Are you confident? I am. All right then. Han Zong looked at Jian Chen sternly and passed him a jade slip. He said, since you have your own plans, I won't say anything more. This jade slip records some knowledge about martial soul force as well as how to use it. I learned from Qing Shan that you have yet to learn all this, so I do hope it can provide you with some assistance. Han Zong passed the jade slip to Jian Chen and continued. However, the contents are only basic knowledge. It won't touch upon anything deep. The true, core legacy of our martial soul force is imprinted on the martial soul mountain. It can't be taken away at all, nor are there any methods to pass it on to you. If you want to obtain it, you need to come to the martial soul mountain. After that, Zong bid farewell to Jian Chen and left the Sword God Mountains. Afterwards, Adriana of the God Clan visited the Sword God Mountains as well. She was worried about the situation that Jian Chen currently faced. The descent of the heaven-splitting ancestor Will had demonstrated his determination to take Jian Chen away. Even the Hall Elder, Tyne, felt powerless and was uncertain about how to handle the situation. This was because the current God Clan really could not deal with the heaven-splitting ancestor. Compared to the worried Adriana, Jian Chen was extremely optimistic. He told Adriana to not worry. Jian Chen, you need to be careful of the heaven-splitting clan. The elder believes that it's not good matter that the heaven-splitting ancestor has noticed you. Take care. Adriana looked at Jian Chen in worry and warned him sincerely before leaving the Sword God Mountains soon as well. During the next period of time, it was extremely peaceful for Jian Chen in the Sword God Mountains. This was the territory of the Celestial Sword Saint. Without his approval, even the leader of the Radiant Saint Master or the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire did not dare to intrude on this place. As a result, Jian Chen was completely worry-free. He began to focus on comprehending the laws of corrosion. At the same time, Kaya sat on the ground and cultivated deep underground in the cavern cloaked by the concealing formation. At this moment, she slowly opened her eyes and murmured with a frown, "Why are breakthroughs becoming more and more difficult now? I can clearly feel that I seem to have grasped laws of the world at higher levels, but I just can't break through with my cultivation. It feels like some power is stopping me." Kaya sighed gently. Even though she was unwilling to just let the matter be, there was nothing she could do about it. Her gaze gradually landed on the depths of the huge, underground cavern. As she studied it, she gradually became confused. Why do I feel a familiar presence here? But I've never been here before. Kaya's bewilderment gradually increased. In the end, she looked at the very depths of the cavern, and after some slight hesitation, she stood up. Ignoring Jian Chen's warnings from before his departure, she made her way towards the very depths. Before long, she had approached the very depths. She clearly saw a colossal headless corpse as she stood there. The body was floating above a pool of blood quietly. Chapter 2370. Kaya's transformation. The pool of blood that was as vast as an ocean radiated with terrifying vital energy. It submerged the headless corpse in vital energy, seemingly nourishing it. It made the headless corpse brim with life. The corpse belonged to the strongest king of the ancient great apes, Gusta. Kaya stared at Gusta's headless corpse from 100 kilometers away. She would glance at the vast pool of blood from time to time. Her doubts grew. She could clearly sense that the source of this sense of familiarity was right in front of her. However, she was rather hesitant. She did not dare to go up, as she knew that the region 100 kilometers around the pool of blood was a forbidden zone. It would be very difficult for her to survive with her current strength. However, the hesitation only lasted for a while. Suddenly, she stepped forwards, setting foot in the range of 100 kilometers. At a closer glance, Kaya's eyes had already lost their usual liveliness and color. All of a sudden, they seemed hollow as if she had lost her soul, where her actions were no longer hers. Boom! At the same time, the pool of blood no longer remained peaceful with Kaya's intrusion. The entire pool of blood surged and churned wildly as terrifying vital energy swept towards Kaya with devastating power. The vital energy churned terrifyingly. Even primordial realm experts faced the danger of dying before the vital energy, let alone Kaya, a mere god king. However, Kaya's eyes were hollow and dull, making it seem as if she could not sense the incoming danger at all. She continued to make her way forward, nearing the vital energy that surged over. In a single instance, the terrifying vital energy arrived before Kaya with devastating power. However, just when Kaya was about to be swallowed, a seemingly invisible power appeared from her body. The appearance of the power made the laws there change. It was like the laws in the space around her had been forcefully twisted into new laws by a pair of invisible hands. In the end, the terrifying vital energy that was enough to kill primordial realm experts immediately eased up when it approached Kaya. It lost all of its wildness, no longer posing any threat. Kaya's eyes remained hollow. She advanced step by step, where she took each one steadily and firmly. She grew closer and closer to the pool of blood up ahead. The space around her twisted, and the laws fell into chaos. It was like they had been interfered with and forcefully changed, making her the supreme ruler there who could not be defied. Up ahead, the tremendous pool of blood that nourished Gusta churned even more violently. The blood-red waves shot high into the air, sweeping towards Kaya with even more terrifying vital energy. However, it remained a futile effort. No matter how terrifying the vital energy was, even if it could harm peak experts, it was still not enough to stop or harm Kaya. In the end, Kaya arrived 3 kilometers away from the pool of blood. At this moment, a barrier rose up and blocked Kaya, enveloping the entire pool of blood. The barrier was extremely powerful. It had fused with the terrifying vital energy in the pool, using it as an endless energy source. Moreover, it had even fused with the fragments of the laws of the world, allowing it to possess unbelievable defense in the end. Kaya stopped before barrier. Her hollow eyes suddenly changed at that moment, becoming boundless and profound like the cosmos. The endless mysteries of the world seemed to be invoked, possessing the truths of the world and hiding the ultimate essence of the ways. At a certain moment, her eyes were no longer hollow. They recovered their light. It was a pair of icy cold, emotionless eyes. They were extremely unfamiliar. The eyes basically made Kaya seem like a completely different person. However, Kaya's entire bearing underwent a drastic change with the appearance of these eyes. In that instance, a supreme, dignified sense seemed to appear around her. The astonishingly powerful barrier that could even stop Grand Primes suddenly twisted before Kaya. The barrier had cracked open silently, as if it had been ripped open by an invisible power. It formed a tunnel. Kaya's eyes remained cold. The greatest essence of the ways seemed to gather around her, making her seem invincible. It was like she could control the entire region. She directly stepped through the crack in the barrier and set foot within 3 kilometers of the pool of blood. Jian Chen was unable to get this close even with the Anata Tower, yet it had been extremely easy for Kaya. It was like all the arrangements here were unable to stop her tracks. The pool of blood churned wildly as it roared thunderously, like Gusta's corpse had produced a roar. Terrifying pressure crashed down on Kaya like a cascade. The pressure was shockingly great. It could twist space and distort time. Even some Grand Primes would not be able to endure it. However, Kaya's face remained the same as before. No matter how the vital energy churned, no matter how great the pressure became, it was all unable to shake her, unable to approach her. In the end, she stood at the edge of the pool of blood and stared at it emotionlessly. She extended a finger towards it gently. The world seemed to be ripped apart under the gesture, causing the waves to boom out. The churned blood began to part, forming a tunnel that led straight to the bottom of the pool. The pool was hundreds of meters deep. A droplet of bright blood rested in the very depths quietly. The droplet of blood differed greatly from the rest of the pool. Not only was it at a higher level, but the energy it contained was even more terrifying as well. Even if all the vital energy within the pool was combined, it would still be nowhere near enough to match the droplet of blood. This was because the pure energy within the droplet of blood seemed to be absorbed by the pool at all times, making the energy within it leak away, while the energy of the pool was gradually strengthened. In the end, the energy in the pool would be used to nourish Gusta's headless body, not only making it brimming with life, but also constantly refining it, making it more and more powerful. Clearly, the droplet of blood only existed to nourish Gusta's body. A cold light suddenly flashed through Kaya's emotionless eyes when she saw the droplet of blood. As she was in thought, she gently waved at the blood. Immediately, the droplet of blood seemed to experience a calling. It flew out from the bottom of the pool by itself, shooting into one of Kaya's eyes as a streak of red light. Kaya's eyes seemed to be connected to a whole different world, so the droplet of blood vanished completely when it entered her eyes. Afterwards, 2 colossal vortexes seemed to revolve in the depths of Kaya's eyes. She looked at the pool of blood. All the blood gathered within the pool suddenly surged violently. Strands of pure vital energy were whisked away, forming a river that flowed into Kaya's eyes. At that moment, Kaya's eyes seemed to become 2 devouring black holes, swallowing all the vital energy and taking it to another space. It was an extremely shocking sight. As the vital energy flowed away rapidly, the blood left in the pool rapidly decreased as well. The level of its surface dropped at an astonishing rate. After all, the pool of blood was extremely vast. It contained so much liquid that it could be described as a sea. It was immeasurable. However, the level of its surface dropped at a visible rate right now, which was more than enough to demonstrate just how quickly the blood was flowing away. In under a quarter of a minute, a third of the pool had vanished at an unbelievable rate. All of the blood had turned into extremely pure strands of vital energy, disappearing into Kaya's eyes. Kaya did not suck away all of it. After taking away a third, she stopped. Afterwards, she slowly turned around and left the pool's edge. She made her way towards the distance without any reluctance at all. She never even glanced at the colossal body covered in dark gold fur that was nourished at the center of the pool. It was as if the body was not worthy of her attention. Even though the corpse gave off an extremely tremendous pressure, possessing terrifying energy that could shake up the world, it still did not draw her attention. In the end, Kaya arrived over 100 kilometers away from the pool, stepping beyond the boundary. The churning pool gradually settled down at this moment as well, recovering its calmness. However, the reduced blood in the pool did not return, so the headless corpse had sunken as a result. Suddenly, Kaya wavered. She collapsed on the ground as if she had fainted. However, she did not remain unconscious for very long at all before waking up. The coldness and emotionlessness in her eyes had vanished already. Her eyes had recovered their usual light. Strange. Why did I suddenly faint? Kaya sat on the ground in confusion. She was completely clueless about what happened moments ago. The white-robed leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Xueqi, gathered with several dozen radiant god kings in the Tower of Radiance. However, Xueqi was not standing within the sacred pavilion, but in the miniature world that contained the Grand Exalt's legacy. Soon after Jian Chen's departure, the miniature world had opened up once again. It did not close up after that, allowing people to move in and out as they wished. However, even with that being the case, there were not many people in the miniature world. There were only a few dozen. Many curious Radiant Saint Masters had gathered outside the gateway to the miniature world. There were many peak lords and radiant god kings among them. All of them wanted to enter the miniature world, but none of them dared to set foot in there. This was all because of something that the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sun Ji, had said. That simple sentence had taken away the rights of all these Radiant Saint Masters to enter the miniature world. However, all the Radiant Saint Masters gathered there happened to be helpless about it as well. This was because Gong Sun Ji's true identity had already become public. As the descendant of the Grand Exalt, he had become an existence who stood above everyone. He also formed an insurmountable obstruction. The several dozen Radiant God Kings gathered in the miniature world all showed respect towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Gong Sun Ji was the only God King among them who no longer bowed to the leader, and no longer showed him any respect. At this moment, Xueqi stood with his eyes closed before the stele that reached towards into the clouds, comprehending the diagram in there. Although the legacy at the bottom of the stele had been taken away, the diagram within the stele had not dispersed. It remained there. At this moment, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall finally opened his eyes. He stared at the stele before him with mixed feelings and thought, "It really doesn't work. Once I comprehend to the end, I'll encounter an invisible barrier, and there is nothing I can do about it with my current ability." Was Jian Chen telling the truth, that it can only be overcome with martial soul force? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall frowned. Only members of the Imperial clan can comprehend the diagram that Master left behind in the past. You're not a part of the Imperial clan, so you have no right to comprehend Master's diagram. At this moment, an obscure voice rang out in the leader's head. Xueqi gathered his attention when he heard the voice. Obviously, he knew that the voice came from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. This was because only the artifact spirit that stood like a god within the Tower of Radiance could communicate with him without giving his location away. The Imperial clan? What's the Imperial clan? The leader of the Radiant Saint Master replied with a question, starting a mental conversation with the artifact spirit. Members of the Imperial clan control a special power. This power is known as martial soul force by you. As long as they possess martial soul force, they are members of the Imperial clan among hallowed saint masters. What did you say? Asked Xueqi. The artifact spirit's message was astonishing, booming through Yuchen's head like a bolt of thunder. It utterly stunned him. The people of the martial soul lineage are intolerable mortal enemies of our Radiant Saint Hall. How can they be the Imperial clan among hallowed saint masters? Xueqi refused to accept this. The news was just too shocking, completely toppling his beliefs and understanding. The artifact spirit said coldly and emotionlessly, I don't know the reason why you who are only regular citizens now stand as enemies of the Imperial clan, but during my master's age, your identities would only be citizens of the Empire. Empire? Was there an empire completely formed out of Radiant Saint Masters back then? Yuchen immediately asked. There was no record of this information he had just learnt. Even the oldest, most ancient archives were unable to dictate something so distant. That's right. During that age, we were a powerful group within the universe. We had a great, prosperous empire completely composed out of hallowed Saint Masters. Under Master's lead, we claimed territory after territory and carved out a piece of the world for ourselves, establishing an everlasting state, said the artifact spirit slowly, narrating the matters of the past. The Master of the Tower of Radiance actually possessed martial soul force as well. Yuchen became lost as he struggled to accept all this. The news from the artifact spirit had almost overturned everything he knew in the past. Since the Master of the Tower of Radiance is a part of the Imperial clan and possesses martial soul force, shouldn't his descendant possess martial soul force as well? Yuchen asked again. Every member of the Imperial clan is given birth to by the world. It has nothing to do with bloodline. Chapter 2372. Gong Sunji's change. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, Yuchen, did not communicate with the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance for very long. However, during this short amount of time, the information he learned from the artifact spirit had shaken up his mind more than anything else. Even though he was as powerful as a Grand Prime and possessed a mind of steel, he was still affected. The Imperial clan is given birth to by the world. Yuchen felt bitter inside. The martial soul lineage was the mortal enemy of the Radiant Saint Hall. There would be fighting and deaths as soon as they encountered each other. It was impossible for them to reach a compromise. As a matter of fact, there were clear records of them exterminating the entire martial soul lineage in a few ancient archives within the Radiant Saint Hall. Whether it was the Radiant Saint Hall or the martial soul lineage, they had both existed for countless years. During this time, countless conflicts of varying scales had erupted. The martial soul lineage had even been devastated by the Radiant Saint Hall several times in history. They had killed off all members of the martial soul lineage, leaving the martial soul mountain empty. However, the world would give birth to new members of the martial soul lineage, so even if they all died, someone new would appear in the future. All the secret techniques and legacies of the martial soul lineage were imprinted on the martial soul mountain as well. Hence, as long as they returned to the martial soul mountain, they would be able to grasp all of it. It was exactly because of this that the martial soul lineage's legacy still existed. Now that the martial soul lineage that the Radiant Saint Hall had killed off several times throughout history was actually called the Imperial clan by the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, while they, the hallowed Saint Masters, were actually the citizens of the Imperial clan, it all felt like a huge joke. If the person who had said this was not the artifact spirit of the supreme treasure of the Radiant Saint Hall, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall probably would have killed them with a slap already. Since the martial soul lineage is the Imperial clan, why are they so weak? According to my knowledge, basically none of them have managed to become a Grand Prime throughout history, asked the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall sternly. Every single member of the Imperial clan is an extremely powerful existence. They're the protector gods of the everlasting state. As for why they've become as weak as you've mentioned, something has probably happened to the Imperial clan after my master passed away. The artifact spirit's voice rang out in Yuchen's head. Yuchen fell silent and no longer bothered about the matter with the martial soul lineage. He continued to ask, "Since you've awakened now, will you be choosing a new master? If you do choose a new master, will they be a member of the Imperial clan, or will it be the descendant of your master? Or maybe someone else? My master is dead, but..." The artifact spirit suddenly stopped talking and fell silent afterwards. Artifact spirit? Yuchen waited for a while. After the artifact spirit stopped responding to him, he began to call out, but he received no reply in the end. It was as if his contact with the artifact spirit was lost. He was unable to look for the artifact spirit here. Unless the artifact spirit made contact with him first, there was nothing he could do. After all, the level of the Tower of Radiance was just too high, and it was basically in perfect shape, different from the damaged Anata Tower. Even with the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's strength, he could not act as he wished within the Tower of Radiance. At the same time, a middle-aged man in white robes sat on the ground within an unknown space of the Tower of Radiance. The middle-aged man was the artifact spirit of the Saint Artifact that had once accompanied Jian Chen. Now, His identity had changed drastically. He had become the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, which elevated his status to a whole new level. The artifact spirit trembled gently. His body would fade and consolidate. He was extremely unstable. As an artifact spirit, he did not have a body at all. Although the body he possessed right now seemed no different from one that had flesh and blood, it was only a spirit conjured from energy. The artifact spirit's power was unstable, which affected the spirit. It made his body fade in and out. No! My master is not dead. My master is Jian Chen. Jian Chen is my true master, the artifact spirit bellowed furiously. The light in his eyes changed rapidly, as if two completely different thoughts were locked in an intense battle. I've absorbed the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. Although the lingering consciousness contains the artifact spirit's memories, it also contains his thoughts. His thoughts are affecting me, attempting to influence me secretly into becoming him. But that's impossible. Don't you even think about twisting my mind, lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit. I will never become a second you, as I will cease to be me if that happens. The artifact spirit growled as he did his best to suppress the influence from the lingering consciousness. Yu Chen, who stood before the stele, finally sighed and gave up on waiting since the artifact spirit did not reply after such a long amount of time. Leader, you must know about my identity already. The master of the Tower of Radiance is my ancestor. My ancestor's legacy has chosen me, but the crucial cultivation method in the legacy was stolen by Jian Chen of the martial soul lineage through underhanded methods. I hope the leader can take it back as soon as possible and complete my ancestor's legacy. As soon as Yu Chen opened his eyes, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak standing behind him, Gong Sun Ji, spoke out. His voice was filled with undisguised anger. He showed no respect towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall at all. Instead, he acted like they were equal. As a matter of fact, there was even a sliver of arrogance. It was as if Gong Sun Ji felt like his status now surpassed the leader of the Radiant Saint Halls, as he was the descendant of the master of the Tower of Radiance and the blood of a grand exalt flowed through him. Yu Chen obviously sensed Gong Sun Ji's transformation. He frowned slightly and said slightly seriously, "That's a matter for the upper echelon of the Sacred Hall to consider. It's not something you should be worrying about. Just do what you need to do." With that, Yu Chen left. After Yu Chen's departure, Gong Sun Ji's face gradually sank. He looked in the direction that the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had traveled off into as he thought. You were the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall once. You stood high up, where I could only look up to you. But now, I am the Grand Exalt's descendant, and the Grand Exalt's blood flows through me. I've also obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, so my future accomplishments will be limitless. You will end up under my feet sooner or later, and the position of leader will be mine one day as well. Gong Sun Ji's confidence swelled. Gong Sun Ji, although you're the descendant of the master of the Tower of Radiance, it doesn't seem appropriate for you to talk to the leader like that, Donglin Xueqi said with a frown from behind Gong Sun Ji. Gong Sun Ji snorted coldly and said, "There is no need for you to stick your nose into my matters. Donglin Xueqi, seeing how you worked with me in holding off Jian Chen before, I'll let this slide this time. If you dare to disrespect me again, I'll get the artifact spirit to chase you out." Gong Sun Ji turned around and stared at Donglin Xueqi. He said coldly, "Although I'm not the master of the Tower of Radiance right now, the Tower of Radiance did come from my ancestor, and I've already obtained my ancestor's legacy. I will inherit the Tower of Radiance before long, and the artifact spirit will accept me as his master." Donglin Xueqi looked at the cold Gong Sun Ji and said nothing. She did not doubt Gong Sun Ji's words at all. There was probably no other person more suitable than Gong Sun Ji for inheriting the Tower of Radiance. After all, the automatic submission of the Grand Exalt's legacy had set everything straight. Donglin Xueqi, don't argue with him. Ever since Gong Sun Ji obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, he has changed. He's no longer the same Gong Sun Ji as before. The Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak's voice rang out in Donglin Xueqi's head. Donglin Xueqi sighed inside. She listened to the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak and no longer argued with Gong Sun Ji. She had already broken through to late God King now, so she needed to spend a very lengthy period of time in the Tower of Radiance. She did not dare to venture out, just in case the mysterious expert who specifically targeted late Radiant God Kings appeared. When he saw how Donglin Xueqi, who also stood as a lord of a main peak, no longer argue with him, Gong Sunji became even more arrogant. It was to the point where he started to look down on them. Afterwards, Gong Sunji looked towards the gateway to the miniature world and looked down at the radiant saint masters there, who wanted to enter the miniature world but dared not. He said coldly, "I want to know everything about Jian Chen, along with everything about his current situation in the outside world. I will give whoever provides me with the most accurate and most complete information permission to enter the miniature world. If you satisfy me, I can even watch out for you specially in the future." Gong Sunji's words caused a disturbance among the radiant saint masters outside. Many of them became interested, and immediately, a few left. They were heading off to collect the information that Gong Sunji wanted. Gong Sunji's identity now was very different. Many radiant saint masters, even radiant god kings, wanted to develop ties with him for the future. As a result, plenty of people were willing to serve him. 9 sword-shaped mountains stood quietly within an extremely well-hidden space within the Tower of Radiance. Who knows how many years the mountains had stood there? They gave off a heavy presence of age. A snow-white sword was planted on each of the peaks. There were a total of 9 swords. They shone with dazzling light, like miniature suns atop the mountains. The space around the swords was all twisted, a phenomenon caused by extremely great power. The power originated from the 9 swords. A devastating power was sealed with the 9 swords. It was terrifyingly powerful. The artifact spirit appeared silently among the 9 mountains as a middle-aged man. He glanced past the swords on the mountains and murmured, "The master of the Tower of Radiance had 9 extremely powerful retainers who fought wars with him, leaving behind a meritorious record of service. When the master of the Tower of Radiance died, his 9 retainers did not choose to continue living either. They used their innate secret technique to condense their vital essence, condensing their bodies and their power into 9 swords. They left these swords to the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance to keep suppressed here, so that they could serve the next master of the Tower of Radiance in battle. As long as someone possesses one of these 9 swords, they will possess the power of one of the 9 retainers. They'll immediately be able to fend off peak experts. I learned from the memories of the artifact spirit that the 9 retainers transformed themselves into these 9 swords after the master of the Tower of Radiance died. Afterwards, the swords were stored here by the artifact spirit. As a result, the control over the sword should be with the artifact spirit. The artifact spirit stared at the 9 swords, and his brows furrowed tightly. Although I've learnt of the existence of these 9 swords, I don't know how to allocate them. It looks like I need to fuse with even more memories of the artifact spirit to learn the method of allocation in greater detail. But the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit will have a greater and greater influence on me if I do that. I might even become a second him and cease to be me. The artifact spirit hesitated. Clearly, he understood the huge risk involved in fusing with more memories from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance. However, very soon, the artifact spirit made up his mind and became determined. Master has gone to such great lengths to make me the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, yet he's facing great danger outside, and I can't do anything about it. Once the 9 swords have been allocated, they might be able to help Master. I can't think too much about it now for Master's sake." The artifact spirit suddenly vanished. "What did you say? The martial soul lineage is the imperial clan among us radiant saint masters?" Xianzhan stood within the sacred hall. He stared at Yu Chen with widened eyes and disbelief. Yu Chen nodded. He seemed to be in a slight daze as he said, "That's indeed what I learned from the artifact spirit." Xianzhan stared at Yu Chen closely. After confirming that Yu Chen was not joking, he sucked in a deep breath and said, "I really never thought that the martial soul lineage we never got along with would actually. Sigh. What do you plan on doing next? Do you plan on announcing this or keeping it hidden?" Yu Chen shook his head and said sternly, "Only you and I know about this right now. Let's not tell anyone else for now. Even I can't accept the fact that the martial soul lineage is the imperial clan, let alone others. After all, the grievances between our Radiant Saint Hall and the martial soul lineage has already reached the point of no return. If we announce this news, it'll probably only lead to an upheaval." Xianzhan sighed gently. "This news is just too shocking. It is indeed inconvenient for too many people to know about it." Xianzhan stared at Yu Chen and changed the subject. "What do you plan on doing about the cultivation method with Jian Chen?" Chen stood with his arms behind his back as he stared at the endless sea of clouds outside. Ever since Gong Sun Ji learnt that the blood of a grand exalt flows in his veins, his mentality has begun to change. He cares about this even more than me, and he desires the grand exalt's cultivation method severely. If Jian Chen survives 3 years later, a battle will definitely happen between the two of them. One of them belongs to the martial soul lineage, the imperial clan of the Radiant Saint Masters, while the other one possesses the bloodline of the Master of the Tower of Radiance, making it extremely likely for him to become its second master. Their battle should be extremely interesting. At the same time, in the residence of an elder somewhere else in the sacred hall, the white-robed Baiyu knelt on the ground as her body trembled gently. Her head was buried deeply as tears flowed from her eyes constantly. She was filled with utter sorrow and grief. A white-robed, middle-aged woman sat before her emotionlessly. The middle-aged woman was an elder of the Radiant Saint Hall, Mu Xue. Master. Baiyu knelt before Mu Xue and sobbed. Baiyu, you should go. Return to your soaring clouds peak. From today onwards, you are no longer my disciple, Mu Xue said firmly. Her gaze towards Baiyu contained some pity. She continued, don't blame me for being vicious. Blame the second senior brother of your soaring clouds peak. Your second senior brother is Jian Chen of the martial soul lineage in disguise. You were so close with him, so even if you had no idea about his true identity, I still can't accept you as my disciple. From today onwards, our bond is severed. We no longer know each other. Go, Mu Xue said coldly. Baiyu's heart immediately shivered when she heard Mu Xue's heartless words. She said nothing at all. After bowing her head 9 times towards Mu Xue, she wiped away her tears and stood up before leaving the sacred hall in low spirits. Master, Baiyu knew nothing before. She's innocent. Why must you be so heartless? Donglin Yanxue walked in afterwards and looked at Mu Xue furiously. Mu Xue's feelings became extremely mixed as she looked at Donglin Yanxue. There was undisguised disappointment. She sighed deeply and said, Yanxue, you were always so clever, so why have you become so dumb now? You clearly knew that the martial soul lineage is our mortal enemy, yet you still helped Jian Chen escape, which was a huge mistake. I know what I'm doing. Master, do you plan on severing your ties with me just like Junior Baiyu? Donglin Yanxue said without any regrets at all. Mu Xue treated Donglin Yanxue completely differently from Baiyu. She sighed gently and said, Yanxue, what you should be thinking about isn't something as simple as the severance of our relationship but the incoming punishment instead. You know that your situation is far more severe than Baiyu's. I'll just relinquish the position of chosen saint. I am a part of the Donglin clan. Our Donglin clan may not be as great as the Radiant Saint Hall, but we're still a peak organization that dominates an entire region. I refuse to believe that the Radiant Saint Hall is bold enough to execute me. Donglin Yanxue was fearless. When Mu Xue saw how Donglin Yanxue did not even care about the position of chosen saint for Jian Chen's sake, she deeply understood that her proudest disciple held extremely deep feelings towards Jian Chen. This made her feel powerless. She could only sigh inside. Master, I will be dismissing myself. Donglin Yanxue bowed slightly and left. On the soaring cloud's peak, Han Xian sat in a small wooden hut at the top of the mountain. He clutched a thumb-sized crystal in his hand. The crystal was called a memory crystal. It could hold recordings of images and voices. Han Xian's hand trembled uncontrollably as he looked at the crystal in his hand. Even his face had paled unnaturally. The crystal came from his clan. It recorded a personal message from the person in charge of the Han family. His words changed Han Xian's identity and fate. Undisguised grief filled Han Xian's eyes as he stared at the crystal in his hand. His eyes had become bloodshot. He refused to accept the contents of the crystal. He wanted to send the senses of his soul into the crystal again to check the message from the patriarch of the Han family again. However, he lacked the courage. The Han family has abandoned me. My name has been removed from the family tree. From today onwards, I may still be surnamed Han, but I have nothing to do with the Han family anymore. Han Xian murmured sternly. His heavy voice was extremely hoarse. All because Chongyang was my disciple, because Chongyang is Jian Chen of the martial soul lineage in disguise, my clan has expelled me. Han Xian stood up slowly. He arrived outside the wooden hut and stared at the sea of clouds beyond the mountain. His bleak figure seemed lonely. At the foot of the mountain was the white-robed Bai Yu. She climbed the steep, long steps in low spirits as well. She made her way up the soaring cloud's peak step by step. Her eyes were red, hollow and lifeless. She seemed like she had lost her soul. She did not choose to fly with radiant saint force. Instead, she used her feet like a mortal, climbing the long steps like a machine. The second senior brother she admired the most was actually a member of the martial soul lineage, and had become a public enemy of everyone inside the Radiant Saint Hall. Even her master, Xueqi, who had given her glory and status, had expelled her as a disciple. All these matters impacted Bai Yu greatly, harming her still tender heart very much. Even though she had been cultivating for quite some time already, the environment she grew up in allowed her to maintain the heart of a young lady. Her mind was extremely frail. After a very long time, Bai Yu finally arrived at the end of the stone steps. Her white shoes were all muddy now. Han Xueqi seemed to have been waiting at the end of the steps for a very long time. He stood there quietly and stared at Bai Yu in her soiled white robes. "Teacher, I've been expelled by my master." Bai Yu choked back her tears as she looked at Han Xueqi's haggard face. "I already know. You might not be the disciple of an elder anymore, but you're still the disciple of my soaring cloud's peak," said Han Xueqi. At this moment, a few hallowed saint masters arrived around the soaring cloud's peak. The one leading them happened to possess a 6-colored soul core. The 6-colored soul core was equivalent to overgods among fighters. "I am the disciple of the Blue Water Peak, Gu Han. Is disciple Xuefeng present?" The leading hallowed saint master said loudly, ignoring Han Xueqi's presence. His voice rang out across the entire soaring cloud's peak. Xuefeng flew over from afar on the soaring cloud's peak. "Are you Xuefeng? I've come under the orders of my teacher. The soaring cloud's peak is no longer suitable for you. Are you willing to leave the soaring cloud's peak and become a disciple of our Blue Water Peak?" asked the hallowed saint master. Xuefeng beamed when he heard that. Due to Jian Chen, the soaring cloud's peak had developed a very bad name within the Radiant Saint Hall now. Xuefeng had already wanted to break away from the soaring cloud's peak. Hence, now that the lord of another peak invited him, he immediately became tempted. However, soon afterwards, he became troubled and looked at Han Xueqi. Han Xueqi stood with his hands by his sides. He said emotionlessly, "Xuefeng, if you want to go, then go." "Thank you for allowing me, sir." Xuefeng clasped his fist and left the soaring cloud's peak with no reluctance at all. Before long, a travel-weary group of female Radiant Saint Masters arrived. The person at the front was a woman who roughly seemed to be in her 30s. She also had a 6-colored soul core, and she said softly, "Is disciple Bai Yu present? I have come under the orders of the Lord of the Myriad Flowers Peak to invite you to join us." Han Xueqi sighed gently when he saw the people from the Myriad Flowers Peak. He seemed to age in that instance. The situation with the soaring cloud's peak was indeed hopeless now. Even the 2 remaining disciples were going to be taken away. Han Xueqi waved his hand rather powerlessly and said, "Sai, you should all go. Go find a new future. The soaring cloud's peak is no longer suitable for you to stay." With that, Han Xueqi turned around and left. He seemed slightly lonely. "No, I won't leave the soaring cloud's peak. No matter what happens to the soaring cloud's peak, I, Bai Yu, will always remain as a disciple of the soaring cloud's peak." In the blink of an eye, it had already been a year since Jian Chen arrived in the Sword God Mountains. He had spent the entire time comprehending the laws of corrosion, but without the Fortune Jade, his rate of comprehension was significantly slower. He only made it to mid-over God after an entire year. "It looks like I can only comprehend the laws of corrosion to God King in the remaining 2 years. I can only depend on Kai Ya for the laws of creation and fire," thought Jian Chen. Even though he had been cultivating through absorbing the golden cores of laws and would not encounter any bottlenecks at all, he simply did not have enough time. And the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall hasn't come again after that time. I wonder if he has really made things tough for Donglin Yanxue and the Soaring Clouds Peak. It's a pity that I don't have the ability to help them, Jian Chen sighed secretly inside. He sat within his dwelling and stared in the direction of the Radiant Saint Hall for a while before going to find the Celestial Sword Saint. The Celestial Sword Saint had not changed at all since Jian Chen first saw him. He remained seated in the same position with his back towards Jian Chen. Like a meditating monk, he had not moved at all. "I know why you've come. You don't need to worry about the people you have ties with in the Radiant Saint Hall. As if he knew everything, the Celestial Sword Saint answered Jian Chen's question before he could even ask anything. Jian Chen knew that with the Celestial Sword Saint's strength, he was aware everything that happened on the entire desolate plain even if he remained here. He bowed towards the Celestial Sword Saint and asked, "Senior, may I ask about Donglin Yenshua's current situation? That little girl you've mentioned has been taken away by Donglin Su before she was punished. Donglin Su is the current ancestor of the Donglin clan, so you don't need to worry about her." Jian Chen finally became relieved and stopped worrying a lot. Time passed silently. Over 2.5 years had passed since Jian Chen's arrival at the Sword God Mountains. On this day, a faint gray mist suddenly permeated Jian Chen's cave, radiating outwards. The gray mist was extremely corrosive. Wherever it passed by, the ground was eaten away, and the vegetation withered. Even the origin energy in the surroundings fused with the great mist, becoming a part of it, allowing the mist to become even more powerful. But that was all. As the gray mist gradually ate away at the vegetation, a hazy light suddenly appeared. Powerful sword intent permeated the surroundings and flooded the gray mist. Even from the ground, the same light appeared, forcing back the gray mist. After all, the Sword God Mountains was the Celestial Sword Saint's territory. Every single leaf and pebble there had become extraordinary under the perpetual influence of the Celestial Sword Saint's sword intent. They possessed power that could not be underestimated. At this moment, the gray mist completely receded into the cave. Afterwards, Jian Chen walked out from the cave. "I've finally comprehended the laws of corrosion to God King after 2.5 years. I need the laws of the sword, creation, destruction, fire, strength, curses, and corrosion to activate the lingering power within the 8 experts. I've already grasped the laws of the sword, destruction, strength, space, curses, and corrosion out of the 8. Coupled with Kai Ya's laws of creation and fire, they all happen to be at God King." Having achieved his objective, Jian Chen no longer wanted to stay in the Sword God Mountains. Immediately, he went to find the Celestial Sword Saint to bid farewell to him. He wanted to leave early and take everyone by surprise. "I said that I would let you stay in the Sword God Mountains for 3 years, not 1 day more or less," said the Celestial Sword Saint in a forceful manner. Helpless, Jian Chen could only stay in the Sword God Mountains for the remaining half of a year. Jian Chen planned on comprehending the laws of the sword with the remaining time. Although he had obtained the Grand Exalt's cultivation method for Radiant Saint Force, allowing him to reach an even higher level, it was impossible for the increase in just half a year to have any impact on his battle prowess. As for the method of using martial soul force he had obtained from Han Zong, it was only the basics. The true core of the entire legacy remained on the martial soul mountain. It was impossible for these mere basics to bring him any assistance against the peak experts in half a year's time. As a result, Jian Chen could only spend this remaining time comprehending the laws of the sword. When Jian Chen attempted the path of swords, he had become enlightened to the bearing of a sword immortal. As such, he basically had a foot planted in the sword immortal realm. The sword immortal realm was equivalent to the primordial realm. Sword immortal is about the immortal bearing, and the sword chi must hold the essence of immortal. Although I've already understood it, my sword chi still hasn't transformed completely. Jian Chen did not return to his dwelling. Instead, he found a mountain and began meditating on its peak, comprehending the bearing of immortal, so that his sword chi could transform completely. Although this seemed like a simple process, it was anything but easy to actually achieve it. 1 month. 2 months. Time passed bit by bit. Jian Chen sat there for 4 months. During that time, he was like a statue. He did not move at all. The only change was the sword chi that would surge out from him from time to time, rampaging in the surroundings. The sword chi was either tough or soft, either powerful or weak. It constantly changed, but Jian Chen never took the final step, becoming an immortal of the sword. Jian Chen finally ended his meditation after 4 months and went to seek guidance from the Celestial Sword Saint. Although he was confident that this final step would not take him too long with his talent, he clearly had no confidence in taking the step in the remaining 2 months. If you want to become a sword immortal, you must first understand the word immortal. The understanding of immortal varies from person to person. In the eyes of mortals, immortals possess great power. They can fly in the skies and burrow through the ground. They are beings of eternal life. In the eyes of some cultivators who have quite the accomplishment in cultivation, immortals is only a division of cultivation realms. However, in my eyes, immortals represent the natural way of change in the world. The celestial sword saint's vigorous voice boomed out in Jian Chen's head like a bell, immediately making him feel enlightened. In a trance, he seemed to understand something. He seemed to grasp something. Every single person has a different view on immortals. It holds different meanings to them. But what are immortals to me? Jian Chen left where the celestial sword saint cultivated. He was in a trance as he returned to the mountain where he had meditated for 4 years. He pondered that question thoroughly. My understanding of immortals is that they're free, liberated, and untainted. They have surpassed the world and are unshackled. However, that's only a portion of my understanding towards immortals right now. I haven't found its entirety. No wonder I had only taken a single step when I understood the bearing of sword immortal. My understanding towards immortals is incomplete. Only by filling this in can I reach completion and truly reach the sword immortal realm. Jian Chen began to meditate again. This time, he did not use any power at all. Instead, he was just like a mortal. He sat on the peak of the mountain, enduring the natural elements. In just a month, he became covered by a thin layer of dust. Additionally, his white robes had lost their original colors, having darkened. During the last 3 days that Jian Chen stayed in the Sword God Mountains, a stormy night had arrived. There was a heavy downpour as thunder boomed through the skies. Lightning danced like dragons and snakes. At this moment, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky with an intense flash. However, the bolt of lightning was like a flash through Jian Chen's head. In that instance, he immediately understood what an immortal was to him. He suddenly stood up. He stared at the stormy sky and pointed at it. He called out, "My immortal is the world, and the world is the universe, the endless galaxies. It holds everything and is boundless. My way can hold everything, can devour galaxies, can make everything underneath me become a part of my way. From today onwards, I am a sword immortal, an immortal of the sword." Jian Chen's voice was like the first sounds of the universe. It contained a mysterious power, booming through the entire sky. Boom! A bolt of lightning fell, but the electricity gathered on the tip of Jian Chen's finger. It flickered and dispersed. However, in the next moment, the electricity on Jian Chen's fingertip turned into a resplendent strand of sword qi. At the same time, the storm silently changed. Unknowingly, the rain that fell from the sky was no longer just rain. It had turned into strands of sharp sword qi. The sword qi was densely packed and blotted out the entire sky. It produced a never-ending series of spurts as it fell on the Sword God Mountains. Jian Chen had used his will as a sword immortal to change the power of nature here. Chapter 2376. The ultimate way of the sword in the distance. The celestial sword saint who never moved suddenly opened his eyes. He turned around and looked at Jian Chen sitting within the raining sword qi as his old eyes became extremely deep. He has actually comprehended a way at such a level. He treats the universe as his immortal, to become a sword immortal and reach the primordial realm. This is clearly on the level of the ultimate way of the sword. Now that he has grasped the ultimate way of the sword, his powers of the laws of the sword will be greater than other sword immortals. Moreover, he has used the boundless cosmos to lay down his foundations, so his future potential is unlimited. If he successfully matures, he'll reach the peak. He'll definitely stand at the apex of the universe. The celestial sword saint murmured in a voice that only he could hear. He stared at Jian Chen in the distance, as if he wanted to completely understand Jian Chen's ins and outs. Only a while later did he murmur softly, "He has only just reached the sword immortal realm, yet he has developed already a basic affinity with the way. He can influence his surroundings with his will and change nature. If this child successfully matures, he really does hold the potential to become a sword god in the future. It's just a pity that he cultivates the chaotic body. Even if he reaches the sword god realm and stands at the apex of the universe, his cultivation will never be able to catch up to his comprehension." Several hours later, the storm subsided, and the sky cleared up. Jian Chen did not leave the mountain. Instead, he remained seated where he was, silently consolidating his level of comprehension and comprehending the various wonders that came with the sword immortal realm. Only on the 3rd day did he rouse. This day also happened to be exactly 3 years since he had entered the Sword God Mountains. Not a single day more or less. Not only was the celestial sword saint forceful with his ways, but his temperament was also rather strange as well. When he let Jian Chen stay here for 3 years, he forced him to stay the entire 3 years. Not a single day more or less. Today was the day when Jian Chen would leave. Thank you for your guidance, Senior, allowing me to reach the Sword Immortal Realm. Jian Chen stood behind the celestial sword saint again and bowed towards him deeply. The 3 years are up. Go. Leave the Sword God Mountains. From now onwards, you have nothing to do with me, the celestial sword saint said without looking back. He remained still like a statue. Farewell. If I have the opportunity, I will definitely return Senior's kindness. Jian Chen left after he completed the bow. You will face a crisis of life or death. No one can save you from this crisis. Whether you can survive will be up to your own luck. Do your best. When Jian Chen descended from the mountain, the celestial sword saint's voice rang out in his head. A crisis of life or death? Jian Chen paused. The light in his eyes flickered. He knew the celestial sword saint was not one to tell lies. Since he had said that, it meant that Jian Chen would truly face a crisis. Moreover, he knew that the celestial sword saint was not referring to the current situation. Is it really like the sword spirit said? I will face a crisis? Jian Chen thought before shaking his head. He knew that peak experts were unable to peer into anything about him. Although the celestial sword saint was very powerful, he was still unable to do that. It looks like the celestial sword saint possesses a peak god artifact like the twin swords or the primeval divine hall. If that's the case, the artifact spirit of the god artifact saw a glimpse of my future. Jian Chen found that it made sense the more he thought about it. After all, he had learned from the heaven-splitting ancestor's body of clouds that the celestial sword saint had obtained the 3 live sword gods' legacy. It only made sense for him to possess a peak god artifact. Jian Chen gradually made his way into the distance. The celestial sword saint stared at Jian Chen as his aged eyes became extremely profound. He said, he still doesn't understand that the true crisis is right beside him. However, so what if he does understand? He can't change anything at all. I can only hope that he survives. The artifact spirit sat within a secret space within the Tower of Radiance. His eyes would clear up at times and become murky at other times. An expression of struggle would flash across his face from time to time. The artifact spirit was currently locked in an intense struggle against the thoughts from the lingering consciousness in the Tower of Radiance. Clearly, his situation now was far more severe than in the past. This was because he had fused with too many memories from the lingering consciousness, allowing the lingering consciousness to gain a greater and greater influence over him. 3 years have already passed, but I still haven't found the memory that can release the protector swords. Master, I can't help you. Experts gathered outside the Sword God Mountains. Not only did all the peak experts from 3 years ago arrive, but even more peak experts had hurried over from various places across the Saints' world after Jian Chen's true identity had been exposed. As a result, there were quite a few more peak experts around the Sword God Mountains compared to 3 years ago. They were dispersed around the surroundings, and they looked at the Sword God Mountains with fear. None of them dared to set foot within the mountains. Tu San of the Heaven-Splitting clan happened to be among them. However, his gaze towards the Sword God Mountains was much more fearful. There was even some dread. He was someone who had arrived at death's doorstep 3 years ago. If the Celestial Sword Saint wanted to kill him, his soul would have been destroyed with that stroke. It was also from then on that he gained a deep understanding of the terrifying level the Celestial Sword Saint's strength had reached. As a result, he currently stood far away from the Sword God Mountains. Tyne of the God clan actually isn't here. It looks like she retreated after Master showed himself. But that does make sense. Apart from being undefeatable on the God-Nigma plane if they draw themselves up like a turtle, how can the God clan fend off our heaven-splitting clan? Tu San observed his surroundings with the senses of his soul, and he sneered inside. At the same time, the projection of the martial soul mountain descended once again in outer space. Under Hun Zhang's lead, all the members of the martial soul lineage gathered together and stood in formation. Hun Zhang stood on the projection and stared at the tremendous plain of land that hovered in outer space with shining eyes. Although he had learned from Jian Chen that something major would happen on the desolate plain, Hun Zhang still brought the entire martial soul lineage just in case. He was preparing for the worst-case scenario. There are even more experts this time. Even if we break a soul sword, it probably won't be of much use, the man called Chu Jian said sternly on the martial soul mountain. Let's observe the situation from here first. We can't interfere unless the situation becomes critical. It'll probably be different this time, said Han Zong. Jian Chen's figure slowly appeared near the boundary of the Sword God Mountains. He was making his way out. He did not try to disguise himself because he knew that all his methods of hiding would be useless before these peak experts. Mo Tianyun's mask could only conceal his true appearance and presence. However, it did not make him undetectable to the senses of the soul. Chapter 2377. Returning to the cavern, Jian Chen did not take to the skies. Instead, he walked on the ground, moving at an ordinary speed like a mortal. He made his way out of the Sword God Mountain step by step. He was not fast, but his steps were firm. His every single step seemed to possess some presence of ways, hiding the truths of the world and great wonder. He had successfully reached the Sword Immortal realm. Even though his cultivation level remained the same as before, his comprehension was no different from a primordial realm expert's. Even though he had only just reached the primordial realm, it was still the primordial realm. A primordial realm expert already stood towards the higher end of cultivation in the saints' world. Once a divine kingdom possessed a primordial realm expert, they would immediately be elevated to an ancient empire. My will can change everything in the world, and I can use everything below my will. Jian Chen remained completely calm. As he left the Sword God Mountains, he sensed the various wondrous changes from the Sword Immortal realm closely. At a closer glance, every single leaf and blade of grass, every single pebble and grain of sand, and even origin energy became permeated with the power of ways wherever Jian Chen passed by. It would suddenly glow with a hazy light with Jian Chen's approach. Everything within a certain distance from Jian Chen would be affected by his will as a sword immortal, turning into sword chi. The primordial realm is truly profound. Although I comprehend the way of the sword, I feel like I can control everything. It is like my will can replace the world and form its own, independent domain, thought Jian Chen. Unbeknownst to him, not all primordial realm experts possessed this ability. He could do this because he comprehended the ultimate way of the sword. The ultimate way of the sword stood supreme among the way of the sword. Unknowingly, Jian Chen had already arrived at the boundary of the Sword God Mountains. However, he did not set foot beyond the Sword God Mountains. Instead, he stopped near the boundary and looked around. He was at ease. He felt no fear. I know you're all here. Since you've come, why stay hidden? Why don't you show yourselves? Jian Chen said loudly. His voice boomed through the surroundings like thunder. With that, figures immediately flickered in the distance. The peak experts gathered in from the surroundings while keeping their presence concealed, appearing in the distance silently. Jian Chen, we actually have no ill intentions towards you. We only need the Anata Tower. We do hope you can part with your cherished treasure. We will definitely return the favor with gratitude, said a peak expert who had recently arrived on the desolate plain. You have no ill intentions? The most precious treasure on my person has caught your eyes, so you want to force me to hand it over. If I don't hand it over, you'll take it. Is this your so-called no ill intentions? Jian Chen condemned them severely. Cut the bullshit. Jian Chen. We only want the Anata Tower. It's destined that you won't keep the Anata Tower, so just hand it over. Don't force us to lay our hands on you, said another person coldly. Although you're a part of the martial soul lineage and you have the protection of the God clan, you need to understand that not everyone fears them in the saints' world. Some peak experts spoke up. They desired the Anata Tower. Jian Chen looked at the group of people silently and said nothing more. He took out a formation disc from his space ring unhurriedly and tossed it onto the ground. Although reaching the Sword Immortal realm had caused his strength to increase drastically, he knew better than anyone else that he was not the opponent of even one of these experts. Many of the peak experts secretly shook their heads and scoffed when they saw Jian Chen's actions. They could tell from a single glance that the teleportation formation Jian Chen had taken out could only be used on the desolate plain. It would teleport him very far away, but it was not enough to help him flee from the desolate plain. The desolate plain was very vast, but for experts with their cultivation levels, crossing the entire place only took a few seconds. As a result, they believed that Jian Chen was dreaming if he wanted to use a teleportation formation to escape from them. At this moment, the teleportation formation was activated, and a great power wrapped around Jian Chen, suddenly taking him away. The peak experts did not try to stop him because Jian Chen still stood in the territory of the Sword God Mountains. They did not dare to stop him, so they could only watch him leave. However, the senses of their souls had already enveloped the entire desolate plain. They did not miss even an inch of land. I found him. I would like to see how he plans on keeping the Anata Tower now that he has left the Sword God Mountains. Very soon, the peak experts sneered and departed. The War Dragon Empire was one of the few everlasting empires on the desolate plain. They stood on the same level as the Radiant Saint Hall as a peak organization on the desolate plain. There was a stinking swamp covered by poisonous mist several million kilometers away from the imperial capital of the War Dragon Empire. A very simple-looking stone slab laid at the bottom of the swamp. At this moment, the simple stone slab suddenly shone brightly and Jian Chen appeared on it. This was a path of retreat he had set up beforehand. He had already come up with a method of leaving the desolate plain when he learnt about the existence of the underground cavern, so he had set up everything secretly. He could finally use it all now. At this moment, there was a flash and Jian Chen's figure vanished from the teleportation formation with a pulse of the laws of space. When he reappeared, he had arrived at the very bottom of the swamp. He had discovered the fortune jade here. Afterwards, he moved to one side and suddenly vanished. Even his presence evaporated at that moment. Several seconds later, figures appeared above the swamp one after another. All the peak experts who had come for the Anata Tower had arrived. He suddenly vanished here. I actually can't find him with the senses of my soul. There's definitely an extremely powerful concealing formation in this swamp, or it would have been impossible for Jian Chen to vanish under our watch. I'll personally look around. Immediately, several people dove to the bottom of the swamp, scouring every inch of the place. Meanwhile, the other peak experts hovered in the sky and paid close attention to the people in the swamp. Someone suddenly vanished. It's over there. There really is a concealing formation there. What a powerful formation. It's traceless and gives off no energy at all, seemingly naturally created. Even the senses of my soul can't discover the slightest trace of it. Very soon, the concealing formation hidden in the depths of the swamp was discovered. The eyes of all the peak experts there lit up, and with a flash, they entered the concealing formation. However, as soon as they entered the formation, all of their faces changed because a mysterious power suppressed the senses of their souls. God damn it. I can only extend the senses of my soul to 3 kilometers away. What is this damn place? What a great power. It's actually suppressed the senses of our souls to such a level. There's definitely an astonishing mystery hidden in this place. There's actually such a mysterious place on the desolate plain. I've stayed on the desolate plain for countless years, but I actually know nothing about here. Immediately, many of the peak experts cried out. Chapter 2378. Awakening the vital energy beyond the concealing formation was a long, snaking tunnel that led deep underground. At this moment, all the peak experts squeezed into the narrow tunnel. The light in their eyes flickered as they felt joy, excitement, and curiosity towards the unknown. They slowly advanced through the tunnel. They did not move too quickly, remaining vigilant and cautious the entire time. Not only were they wary of the people around them, but they also had to remain vigilant of any sudden dangers that would appear in this unknown place. This place was just too mysterious. Not only was there a concealing formation that they could not discover with the senses of their souls, but there was also a mysterious power that suppressed the senses of their souls. All of them had realized the extraordinariness of this mysterious place. As a result, they were all cautious of this unknown place. Compared to how careful they were, Jian Chen had no worries since he had been here once already and was extremely familiar with the place. He moved through the winding tunnels as quickly as he could, approaching the underground cavern that kept the corpses of the 8 experts trapped. At the same time, Kaya, who had always remained there, turned her head like she had sensed something. She looked at the entrance of the cavern, and a sliver of joy appeared in her eyes. She murmured, "It's Jian Chen's presence. Jian Chen has returned. He has finally returned after a few years." When she sensed Jian Chen's presence, Kaya immediately became rather eager. However, she frowned soon afterwards. That's strange. Jian Chen seems to be rather hurried. However, as soon as she thought of that, her expression suddenly changed. She could clearly sense that several dozen powerful presences tailed Jian Chen. The owner of each presence possessed terrifying power enough to shake the world. Kaya noticed that the situation was bad, and she began to panic inside. As a result, she failed to question something. Despite being in the underground cavern where basically all senses became useless, she was able to sense these peak experts from so far away. These people are hostile. They're getting closer and closer to Jian Chen. If they catch up to Jian Chen, they'll definitely do something bad to him. What do I do? What do I do? Kaya panicked as she paced around uneasily. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something and immediately looked at the shackled beast corpse nearby. Kaya arrived before the corpse. Without any hesitation, she extended and pressed her hand against it. The laws of fire surged out and poured into the corpse. She had no idea why she took such action, nor did she know about the consequences. All of this was a result of an instinct from the depths of her soul, urging her to do that. The corpse before Kaya happened to belong to the expert who passed on the laws of fire to Jian Chen. Extremely powerful vital energy was sealed within the corpse, and there were layers upon layers of inscriptions around the vital energy that could protect it from all foreign forces. These inscriptions had been laid down by the beast before it had passed away to protect its last shred of vital energy. Unless it was someone who had inherited his golden core of laws, no power, including the laws of fire, could penetrate the inscriptions and awaken the vital energy sealed within him. Someone doing so would destroy the arrangements they made in the past. However, when Kaya's laws of fire came into contact with the layer of inscriptions that protected the vital energy, the inscriptions actually melted away silently. In the end, the laws of fire from Kaya entered the terrifying vital energy unimpeded. Immediately, the vital energy sealed within the beast seemed to awaken. It began to churn violently as an unbelievably great power, along with a terrifying pressure, suddenly erupted. It formed an invisible storm that wreaked havoc in the cavern. At this moment, the corpse that had remained dead for countless years seemed to come alive. It demonstrated the shocking might it possessed in the past. Kaya was pushed away by the pressure, only stopping after retreating more than 10 kilometers away. She was temporarily stunned as she looked at the mighty corpse. She was at a loss about what to do. Back to the winding tunnel that led to the underground cavern. The suppression of the senses of my soul are becoming more and more powerful. The initial 3 kilometers have shrunk to 2, but I can't find Jian Chen within this range at all. Since Jian Chen knows this place, he has definitely come here before. He's bold enough to move so quickly, which means there is nothing particularly dangerous here. I think we're being overcautious. This place is mysterious, but we're still Grand Primes after all. There really isn't a lot that can threaten us in this world. We can't be complacent. Even the senses of our souls have been suppressed so severely. The expert who set up this whole place possesses a cultivation far beyond ours. They're a terrifying existence at the same level as the heaven-splitting ancestor or the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing at the very least. It's best if we're careful. Although some of them said that, they moved faster and faster. Very soon, they were moving faster than Jian Chen. They rapidly closed the distance between them and Jian Chen. 5 kilometers. 4 kilometers. 3 kilometers. They drew closer and closer. Due to the fact that Jian Chen's soul had fused with a strand of true chaotic force, he was much better off than the peak experts. As a result, he could sense their approach, which made his heart sink. If matters continued like this, he would not have enough time to awaken the vital energy within the 8 experts even if he arrived in the cavern first. However, at this moment, the entire tunnel began to shake violently. Right after that, a pulse of energy strong enough to shock everyone, along with a tremendous pressure, filled the entire space in a single moment and spread to the tunnel. The pressure was so great and the power was so terrifying that it caused the expressions of all the peak experts in the tunnel to change. They came to a halt as they became fearful. Jian Chen's mind shook, and the golden core of laws for the laws of fire quivered gently in his soul. Immediately, he guessed that Kaya had awakened one of the experts' vital energy. What a terrifying presence! The owner of this presence is an 8th heavenly layer Grand Exalt at the very least. It might even be a 9th heavenly layer, on the same level as the heaven-splitting ancestor and the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing. All the peak experts stopped in the winding tunnel. They all became extremely stern. The sudden terrifying presence made all of them shiver in fear and surprise. Expert at such a level were only second to Grand Exalts. They were even more powerful than the celestial sword saint. They all felt fearful towards someone like that. No! Very soon, a cry rang out. Have you sensed that the presence and pressure from the power seems powerful on the surface, but it's actually slightly weak, as if it lacks support? Chapter 2379. An Astonishing Strike, 1. The eyes of the peak experts narrowed when they heard that, and they immediately paid close attention. Very soon, they discovered the strange phenomenon thanks to their cultivation. It was just like that person had said. The terrifying presence that originated from the depths of the tunnel did indeed seem powerful on the surface, but it was weaker underneath. They became much less fearful with this discovery. After some slight hesitation, they continued their way down. However, they moved much slower. Clearly, they had worries now. By now, Jian Chen had reached the huge, underground cavern. He saw Kaya waiting there with a single glance. He stared at the colossal ancient beast who had passed on the golden core of laws for the laws of fire to him and said, Kaya, continue with your laws of creation and awaken the vital energy within them. It's time for us to complete their final wish. Time was tight, so they had no time to talk. With that, Jian Chen flew off, approaching the corpses of the 8 experts. Kaya also understood that danger was rapidly approaching. Without any hesitation, she moved towards the expert who had given Jian Chen the golden core of laws for the laws of creation. At the same time, Qing Yishuan sat on the fortune jade on the 9th floor of the Anata Tower. Sword chi surged from her as her presence became even more powerful. In all these years, her cultivation had risen like a rocket through Swordmaster Yun Qi's golden core of laws and the fortune jade. She had reached late over God and was on the boundary now. She was already approaching God King. At this moment, Qing Yishuan's presence suddenly swelled. She shone brightly as all of her vital essences underwent a transformation, advancing to a new level. She had finally broken through to God King. After becoming a God King, Qing Yishuan did not continue to cultivate. After stabilizing her current level of cultivation, she slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes shone extremely brightly as powerful sword chi gathered within them. They were extremely dangerous such that people weaker than her would never dare to look her in the eyes. The sword chi in her eyes lasted for a while before slowly dispersing, returning her to normal. God King had once been a cultivation realm that Qing Yishuan dreamed of, but she showed no joy at all now that she had broken through to God King. Instead, she remained extremely calm. I've obtained Swordmaster Yun Qi's legacy, but this legacy came from Chang Yang. Just who is Chang Yang? He didn't take such a great legacy for himself and gave it to me instead. Qing Yishuan thought back to what she went through when she inherited Swordmaster Yun Qi's legacy, and she became filled with doubt. But very soon, her attention was drawn to the fortune jade beneath her. She was surprised and thought, and what kind of treasure is this jade? When I sit on it, the complicated profound laws of the world become much clearer all of a sudden, allowing my comprehension of laws to speed up by several times over. Whatever. I better keep cultivating. Although I've already become a God King, it's nowhere near enough. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance and the solitary sword ancestor who have been hunting down Jian Chen are both grand primes. I wonder if Jian Chen is still alive. However, if Jian Chen is dead, I must personally avenge him once I become powerful enough. With that, Qing Yishuan remained on the fortune jade and continued her comprehension of the laws of the sword. The powerful vital energies were awakened in the underground cavern. As they churned in a terrifying manner, the great pulses they emitted shook up the entire space there. The shackles that restrained the corpses of the 8 experts danced around and shook wildly. The clanking of chains rang out. The vital energy in 6 of the 8 experts had been awakened now. The tremendous vital energies swept through the air like dragons, resonating with one another. It seemed to create a formation, demonstrating astonishing might. However, the formation was still incomplete, so the 6 portions of vital energy struggled to connect with one another and fuse. Jian Chen continued to the next corpse. Very soon, he arrived before Swordmaster Yun Qi's corpse. Without any hesitation, he controlled the power of the laws of the sword and poured them into Swordmaster Yun Qi's body. The vital energy sealed within Swordmaster Yun Qi's body was no different from the other experts. A layer of inscriptions existed around it, protecting the vital energy. However, when Jian Chen's laws of the sword approached the inscriptions, something happened. The inscriptions suddenly erupted with terrifying power, easily nullifying Jian Chen's laws of the sword. At the same time, it sent a portion right towards Jian Chen. This power had been left behind by Swordmaster Yun Qi when he was still alive. Even after countless years, it remained as terrifying as ever. It possessed enough power to kill. The sudden occurrence took Jian Chen by surprise. However, before he could think about it, the 7 golden core of laws in his soul began to bob up and down. The power that surged towards Jian Chen seemed to sense something. The killing intent vanished, and it gave up on attacking Jian Chen. Jian Chen pulled back his hand from Swordmaster Yun Qi's body as the light in his eyes flickered in surprise and doubt. I understand now. The vital energy within the 8 experts cannot be awakened by just anyone. Only those who inherit their legacy can awaken the power. As for other people, even if they comprehend the same kind of laws, they will be mercilessly slain by this power as soon as they touch on the power that protects the vital energy. Jian Chen understood everything very soon. Immediately, he looked in Kai Ya's direction as he felt doubt. Why were Kai Ya's laws of creation and fire unaffected? However, now was not the time to consider that. He took out the Anata Tower and grabbed Qing Yishuan, who had just become a god king. Young Master Chongyang, what are you doing? With her cultivation interrupted, Qing Yishuan felt very displeased. She stared at Jian Chen with a frown. Jian Chen still wore Mo Tianyun's mask, so Qing Yishuan failed to recognize him. Jian Chen cut right to the chase, immediately ordering Qing Yishuan to awaken the vital energy within Swordmaster Yun Qi's body. Qing Yishuan did not dare to disobey Jian Chen. She immediately followed his instructions and awakened the vital energy within Swordmaster Yun Qi very soon. Right after that, she was tossed back into the Anata Tower. Just the last one left. Jian Chen's eyes became extremely bright, and they even contained a sliver of craziness. He was extremely curious about how terrifying the strike from the fusion of the 8 experts' vital energies would be. Moreover, what state would the desolate plain be left in after this astonishing strike? Although it's impossible for this strike to destroy the desolate plain, it'll definitely be able to shave off a layer of skin from the peak experts who want my Anata Tower. And before long, the experts of the ancient great apes should arrive. Although I will be the one who destroys this place, the people who desire the Anata Tower will be at fault as well. Jian Chen arrived before the corpse of the final beast as a crazy light shone in his eyes. So it's past experts who have already died. Jian Chen, you've actually brought us to a place like this. It looks like we really have to thank you properly. At this moment, the peak experts had all arrived as well. They appeared in Jian Chen's view and looked at the corpses of the 8 experts in joy. Chapter 2380. An Astonishing Strike, 2. Thank me? Really? Jian Chen stood on the back of the beast's corpse and smiled strangely. His face gradually turned cold and he said slowly, It's just a pity that I don't need it. With that, Jian Chen poured the power of the final law into the corpse before him without any hesitation at all. Oh no, stop him. A ruddy old man in the group seemed to understand the secrets of this place at that moment, and his face immediately changed. However, it was already too late. With the input of the power of the last law, the vital energy sealed within the beast before Jian Chen suddenly surged. It radiated outwards in a tremendous manner, merging with the vital energies from the other experts and filling the entire cavern. At the same time, an extremely well-hidden formation abruptly appeared. As the formation spun, it enveloped all 8 corpses of the experts. At this moment, the vital energies in the bodies of the 8 experts fused under the assistance of the formation. These were all arrangements that the 8 experts had prepared when they were still alive. Even though their powers completely differed from one another, they fused together perfectly with their arrangements, becoming something even more powerful and terrifying. The formation of the power caused the earth to rumble. The entire cavern shook as the space in there twisted violently. If the cavern was not protected by powerful formations, it probably would have collapsed long ago. This is a trap. He has purposefully led us here. What a scheming brat. Everyone retreat. The expressions of all the peak experts who had followed Jian Chen here changed drastically as they became extremely pale. They staggered backwards in retreat. The power from the fusion of the 8 experts' vital energies had reached an unbelievable level. It made them shiver from the depths of their hearts. At this moment, the terrifying power from the 8 experts suddenly turned into a sharp sword that shot towards Gusta's corpse submerged in the pool of blood with might seemingly capable of destroying everything. The strike was extremely frightening. It had surpassed the strength of any single one of the 8 experts. Wherever the sword passed by, space collapsed, and the laws pulsed and fell into disorder. The invisible barrier around the pool of blood rose up once again, engulfing the entire pool. The defenses of the barrier were extremely great, but it was as fragile as a sheet of paper before the sword condensed from the vital energies of the 8 experts. With a boom, the barrier shattered. As violent energy wreaked havoc, the sword passed through the various obstructions with unbelievable power and landed on Gusta's body. Boom! Immediately, a sound loud enough to shake up the souls of regular infinite primes erupted. Terrifying energy exploded loudly. The pool of blood collapsed, and blood splayed out in all directions. An indescribably powerful storm of energy swept out devastatingly. The peak experts who failed to leave in time were blown away by the shockwave. The protective light around them flickered with great instability, but it only lasted for a few seconds before shattering. Many of them paled as blood oozed out from the corner of their lips. Even their protective god artifacts dimmed. Moreover, the blood from the pool struck their bodies heavily like high-speed shrapnel with powerful pulses of energy. It pushed back the peak experts uncontrollably as they struggled to withstand it. Their cultivation levels were extraordinary, but the strike from the 8 experts was even more terrifying. It was so powerful that the shock wave from the attack was enough to harm them. With a great rumble, the cavern collapsed. Powerful energy punched through the roof of the cavern, reaching the outside world. It formed a huge pit on the surface that the endless pulses of energy used as an exit, surging out from underground and rampaging through the skies of the desolate plain. The body of the strongest king of the ancient great apes, Gusta, had already been ripped to pieces. His fragments and the blood from the pool were all taken out from the cavern with the energy, gushing into the sky and appearing outside. Among it all was a fist-sized, extremely damaged tower. The tower was unbelievably tough. The storm of energy that could destroy Gusta's body and strike fear into the hearts of all the peak experts was actually unable to do anything to the tiny tower. It could only blow the tower away like a fallen leaf in the wind. Just like that, the tiny tower hid in the storm of energy, following the flow to charge out from underground through the collapsed cavern. The entire desolate plain rumbled violently. The 5 regions that were extremely distant from one another seemed to experience extremely powerful earthquakes. Mountains collapsed, the earth cracked, and tsunamis roared. Even many cities collapsed, alarming every expert. At this moment, the entire desolate plain tilted ever so slightly in outer space. The astonishing strike from the 8 experts actually moved the entire plain. What is happening? What terrifying pulses of energy! What is happening? The entire plain was thrown into chaos. People panicked as all the experts on the desolate plain stared off into the distance in shock. All 7 people on the illusionary projection of the Martial Soul Mountains stood up. They all stared at the desolate plain in shock. They personally witnessed the formation of a huge pit on the desolate plain. It plunged into the earth and grew larger and larger, as if it would never stop. The eyes of the heaven-splitting ancestor who sat within the heaven-splitting clan on the 9 Clouds plain suddenly snapped open. His eyes shone as he directly peered through space and looked in the direction of the desolate plain. Moreover, the power of laws circulated through him, making him seem like he had completely fused with the world, where he represented the heavens and possessed supreme power. It's a corpse of a dark gold ape king of the ancient great apes, and it's not the other 2 who were slain by the spirit sages. It seems like it's the one known as their strongest king who died even earlier, Gusta. Gusta's cultivation level in the past was the same as mine. Coupled with the special bloodline of the ancient great apes, his battle prowess is even greater. His body and blood is extremely useful to me. The heaven-splitting ancestor suddenly vanished. This time, he personally set off for the desolate plain. The heaven-splitting ancestor strode through outer space. He seemed to be on a leisurely stroll and was not particularly fast, but the space around him would change with his every step. A step a galaxy, a step a world. The concept of distance did not seem to exist to him as he moved through the tremendous outer space. He traveled at an unbelievable speed, as if he was teleporting, hurrying towards the distant desolate plain. The 49 great plains of the Saints' world were tremendous plains of land that hovered in outer space. Every single plane was extremely distant from the next. Normally, the journey would be completed through spaceships or interplanar teleportation formations. However, once an individual's cultivation reached the heaven-splitting ancestors level, they could control a portion of the heavenly ways. The distance between planes would be nothing before the eyes of such an expert. He even moved through space faster than teleportation formations. The heaven-splitting ancestor was not the only peak expert to sense the events on the desolate plain. At this moment, a few ancient relics who always focused on cultivating and never bothered with worldly affairs roused from their cultivation. These old experts had already been forgotten by people. Their gazes contained age. They had seen through life, death and samsara, having grown indifferent towards wealth and fame and surpassed the worldly affairs. They wholeheartedly devoted themselves to cultivation. It's the strongest one out of the 3 dark gold ape kings of the ancient great apes, Gusta. Gusta's body and essence blood is actually on the desolate plain. The bloodline of a dark gold ape king is extremely rare and noble, and Gusta was also the greatest out of all the ancient great apes. He was only a step away from Grand Exalt. His essence blood might contain his past memories. Gusta's body and essence blood is enough for me to personally set out. All these ancient relics that hid in various places across the saints' world emerged. They crossed through space and hurried towards the desolate plain. On the desolate plain, the celestial sword saint remained seated in the same position during the entire affair in the Sword God Mountains. His eyes pierced through space, and he looked at pieces of Gusta's body and blood that had been thrown into the air. His face was cold, and he remained indifferent to it all. However, invisible sword intent radiated from his body, enveloping the entire Sword God Mountains, causing the mountain range to remain completely unaffected as the entire desolate plain shook. Within the imperial capital of the Violet Wind Empire of the southern region, one of the 5 everlasting empires of the desolate plain, a disheveled, messy, unkempt old man in old clothes leaned against a seat with a group of soldiers from the empire. He laid there lazily with his eyes closed. The unkempt old man seemed to be an infinite prime. He held an important position in the Violet Wind Empire, guarding the teleportation formation that could take people across planes. At this moment, the entire ground shook violently, and the old man who sat on the cane chair suddenly stood up. He looked in the direction of the War Grand Empire, and a sliver of surprise appeared in his old eyes. He said to himself, Gusta's body is actually buried on the desolate plain. I knew nothing about it in the several hundred years I've stayed here. The unkempt old man's eyes became extremely deep. Just when he was about to head over, he seemed to sense something, and his face changed slightly. He immediately became cautious and murmured, I sense a sliver of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's presence. So that's how it is. That place was actually secretly arranged by the Blood Tier Grand Exalt. I cannot. This brat called Jian Chen is just too crazy. He has actually destroyed the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's arrangements. It looks like no one can save him now. At the same time, the heaven-splitting ancestor who traversed through outer space seemed to sense something as well and suddenly stopped. He looked at the distant desolate plain with a frown. There's a sliver of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt's presence, the heaven-splitting ancestor murmured. The endless ways weaved in his pupils as he began peering into the heavenly secrets. A while later, he gave up on venturing to the desolate plain without any hesitation at all. He turned around and returned to the heaven-splitting clan. At the same time, all the ancient relics who headed towards the desolate plain came to a stop. After pausing for a while, they all gave up on the desolate plain. They sighed and returned to where they came from, all feeling that it was a pity. Many experts approached the explosion on the desolate plain. They hurried over from everywhere. There were infinite primes and chaotic primes among them. Over half of all the primordial realm experts on the desolate plain had basically gathered over. Whose corpse is this? It's actually so powerful that just the energy in a single droplet of blood gives me chills. An infinite prime looked at the sky full of blood as he paled in fright. The blood contains extremely pure energy at an extremely high level. It's priceless. An infinite prime cried out. Greed filled his eyes, and he immediately got to work, placing a droplet of blood nearby into a jade bottle. The other primordial realm experts no longer hesitated after they saw someone move. With burning joy and excitement, they began collecting Gusta's blood and fragments. Their attention was completely drawn away by the blood in the sky, and they failed to notice a fist-sized tower silently fly off into the distance along the ground. The tiny damaged tower stopped somewhere hidden after traveling far away from this. Afterwards, it vanished, and Jian Chen and Kaiya appeared out of nowhere. Let's go. Let's leave this place. Jian Chen said. He no longer used the Anata Tower to travel because he would stand out far too much and would be easily discovered. He chose to fly with Kaiya instead. He chose to travel with Kaiya because the peak experts had personally witnessed that he was alone. If he traveled all by himself, there was a very great chance that he would arouse suspicion even if he changed his appearance and concealed his presence through Mo Tianyun's mask. Only a few people knew about Kaiya's existence, so they could avoid standing out and reduce suspicion by traveling together. As for the blood medallions for checking identity widespread across the desolate plain, they had vanished during the 3 years Jian Chen spent cultivating in the Sword God Mountains. After all, the blood medallion was only a temporary item for finding Jian Chen. It was not a rule that existed on the desolate plain, so it obviously would not exist for long. At this moment, several dozen furious powerful presence suddenly appeared from underground. The peak experts who had been led down there by Jian Chen all surged out furiously in horrible shapes. They hovered in the air and roared out angrily. They were all peak experts and possessed great cultivations. The terrifying shockwaves had only caused them a certain degree of harm. It had reduced them to horrible shapes, but it could not truly kill them. After all, they only endured the shockwave, not the actual strike from the 8 experts. Jian Chen, I will never spare you. Tusan hovered in the air, bloodied. His face was pale as he ground his teeth. Afterwards, terrifying senses of the souls swept out from the peak experts. All of them searched for Jian Chen. At this moment, Jian Chen and Kaiya flew at a steady pace 1,000,000 kilometers away from the scene. When the senses of the souls swept past them, the peak experts failed to discover any problems. This was because Jian Chen had used the mask to create a new appearance. Even his body shape and stature had changed. Even the people who knew him the best would not be able to recognize him right now, let alone these peak experts who were not exactly familiar with him. Chapter 2382. 5 droplets of essence blood. After the peak experts enveloped the entire desolate plain with their terrifyingly powerful senses of the souls, they failed to find any trace of Jian Chen. They had seen Jian Chen's appearance and presence before, but he had basically vanished from the plain. Oh no! Jian Chen has vanished again. This time, he actually fled under the watch of all of us. God damn it. He must have used that treasure that can conceal one's presence and disguise their appearance to become someone else. God damn it. We shouldn't have removed the blood medallions so soon. If it were the same as 3 years ago where everyone possessed blood medallions, Jian Chen would have never been able to vanish under our watch. Don't worry. The teleportation formations across plains have already been closed down. It's impossible for Jian Chen to escape from the desolate plain. However, we do need to pay close attention to the members of the marital soul lineage. The peak experts barked as they all felt irritated. They felt very regretful. The martial soul lineage is easy to keep tabs on. What about the person from the God clan? Some of the people in the group frowned. When they mentioned the God clan, they all became fearful. Although the current God clan had declined and was no longer as glorious as it was in the past, they were still one of the peak organizations in the Saints' world. The pale Tu-san who stood among them snorted coldly. He said sternly, "Leave Tyne of the God clan to me. If she remains on the desolate plain obediently, I obviously won't pay any attention to her, but if she tries to take Jian Chen away secretly, I will never spare her. Our heaven-splitting clan does not fear the God clan." As he said that, Tu-san glanced around with his furious cold gaze. He looked at the blood and body fragments that had been blown into the air, and his eyes gradually lit up. Afterwards, with a flash, he immediately appeared several dozen kilometers away and arrived before Gusta's arm. The arm was tens of thousand meters long. It was colossal and had been blown to an altitude of several 100,000 meters. It rapidly fell as dark gold blood spurted out. Several chaotic primes fought against one another around the arm, fighting for ownership of it. Tu-san arrived before the arm and snorted coldly. He gave off a terrifying presence and scared off the chaotic primes. He grabbed the huge arm with one hand as his eyes became filled with undisguised burning desire and joy. He stowed it away in his space ring without any hesitation at all. The peak experts who had charged out from underground all got to work as Tu-san took action. They temporarily gave up on searching for Jian Chen, scattering to collect the blood and fragments of Gusta's body frantically. Gusta was a peak expert on the same level as the heaven-splitting ancestor after all, and his bloodline was extraordinary. As a result, Every single droplet of his blood contained extremely powerful and pure energy. Even the fragments of his body were extremely precious, enough to interest people at the heaven-splitting ancestors level, let alone these peak experts who were far weaker. As a result, Gusta's blood and flesh had become a precious treasure that could only be found through luck in the eyes of these peak experts. It made them all participate. Even the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall and the 8 vice leaders charged over and took part. Behind them were the various elders of the Radiant Saint Hall. Basically all the primordial realm experts across the desolate plain took part in this collection. Only the Celestial Sword Saint and the unkempt old man, who guarded the sealed teleportation formation in the Violet Wind Empire and clearly only seemed to be an infinite prime, did not take part. At this moment, blood and flesh filled the skies. Figures flickered about as all the primordial realm experts flew around, collecting Gusta's flesh and blood with a sense of urgency. There were even many people who began fighting over things that caught their eyes. By now, there was no longer anyone paying attention to Jian Chen. The peak experts who had come for the Anata Tower all collected Gusta's blood and flesh frantically. Jian Chen had vanished from the senses of their souls, so it was impossible to find him quickly. Compared to wasting so much time and effort on finding Jian Chen, they would much rather take the fortune right before their eyes. After all, there was only a single Anata Tower. Who knew who it would end up with? However, everyone could get their hands on the fortune currently before them. In the distance, Jian Chen and Kaya flew away, rapidly moving away from the War Dragon Empire. Jian Chen looked back at the raining blood. He sensed the pure energy hidden within the blood and felt that it was pity. There was so much blood, and all of it contained extremely terrifying energy. Jian Chen wanted to take part very much as well, but he could not given his current situation. At this moment, a great rumble suddenly rang out and terrifying energy swept through the surroundings, wreaking destruction and blotting out the sky. Grand Primes had begun fighting. A huge heart fell from the sky amidst the raining blood. The peak experts gathered around it all struck out, fighting for the heart. Gusta's heart. In the distance, Jian Chen's gaze pierced through space and saw the heart with a single glance. He struggled to remain calm. Within the heart was Gusta's essence blood. The essence blood was even more valuable than the regular blood. After all, Gusta was an extremely powerful peak expert when he was still alive, so his essence blood was even more precious. It could be labeled as an ultimate treasure, and it was enough to interest all the Grand Primes. Suddenly, Gusta's huge heart shattered under the fighting of the peak experts. Immediately, the essence blood hidden within the heart erupted. It was scattered far and wide by the violent energy. All the experts collected the fragments of the heart desperately and greedily. They collected the essence blood. Around them, the infinite primes and chaotic primes there all collected the essence blood greedily as well. Every droplet of essence blood contained unbelievably pure energy as well as the presence of ways and fragments of laws. Its value was self-evident. In the distance, Jian Chen's eyes suddenly narrowed, and he revealed a look of joy. He saw a few droplets of essence blood fly towards him after being pushed out by the energy ripples. He immediately flew up and took out a jade bottle, collecting all of the essence blood. In the end, he collected a total of 5 droplets. They glistened like gold and shone brightly in the jade bottle. The pure energy within them interested even Jian Chen. It made him overjoyed. Even though there were only 5 droplets, not a lot, Jian Chen could feel that they were even more tremendous than the 3 portions of vital energy he obtained from the underground cavern in the past. I've already reached the Sword Immortal realm, so the chaotic body can break through once again. I can advance to the 14th layer. All that I lack right now is energy. If I have a few more droplets of Gusta's essence blood, breaking through will only be a matter of time. Jian Chen's thoughts burned eagerly as he looked at the 5 droplets of essence blood. At that moment, he felt an urge. He was tempted to charge into the battlefield and collect even more essence blood. I can't be greedy. The priority right now is to find a way off the desolate plain. Jian Chen suppressed his urges. Although he had just reached Sword Immortal, he would not be able to collect a lot of essence blood if he charged in. Instead, it would be extremely likely for him to get exposed. After much difficulty, he had finally managed to hide again under the watch of the peak experts. He could not afford any more risks. As a result, Jian Chen could only give up on Gusta's essence blood. While Jian Chen collected the 5 droplets of essence blood, He completely failed to notice that Kaiya's eyes had silently become extremely cold. It was a kind of coldness that was completely emotionless, looking down on all lives as if she had surpassed everything. The cold eyes pierced through space and time, through the ways and the laws, and looked at the battlefield where the peak experts fought. At this moment, all the peak experts revolved around Gusta's essence blood as they engaged in a great struggle. Energy surged in the surroundings and space shattered. No one noticed a thumb-sized, dark gold ball fall with the blood rain. The ball seemed extremely ordinary. Even when it was scanned with the senses of the soul, it seemed like nothing special at all. It was exactly because of this that no one paid any attention to the thumb-sized ball. However, Kaiya stared right at the ball. In the next moment, the dark gold ball seemed to experience the calling of a mysterious power. It stopped falling down and flew to one side, directly approaching Jian Chen. The mysterious presence of Wei seemed to permeate the surroundings as it flew, preventing anyone from noticing it as it approached Jian Chen. Swish! The ball shot through the air as it headed directly towards Jian Chen. Jian Chen had just collected the 5 droplets of essence blood. He was about to return, but he suddenly discovered the ball that flew towards him. The moment he saw the golden ball, his mind shuddered. His soul that had fused with a strand of chaotic force seemed to discover something, and his eyes immediately shone brightly. He extended his hand without any hesitation, catching the dark gold ball. As soon as the pill-sized ball entered Jian Chen's hand, he immediately felt his heart heat up. At that moment, he struggled to keep calm despite his mental fortitude. His heart beat uncontrollably. He could sense an indescribably vast energy within the dark gold ball. Even calling it a sea of energy would be nowhere near enough to describe a tenth of it. Is this Gusta's Niden? His energy reserve? Jian Chen sucked in a deep breath. He could roughly guess the origins of the ball with his current insight. He suppressed his emotions and immediately stowed the dark gold ball away before arriving beside Kaiya in a flash. Quick, let's leave this place. The further we go, the better. Jian Chen grabbed Kaiya's arm and shot off into the distance with lightning speed excitedly. He could already guess that the peak experts would search for the dark gold ball like madmen. He needed to leave this place and go as far away as possible. Kaiya's eyes returned to normal. Her gaze was filled with doubt and confusion as Jian Chen pulled her along. She could vaguely feel that she seemed to have lost a short part of her memory. She felt like her mind had blanked out for a short moment earlier. No matter how she tried to recall her memories, she found nothing, so she could only leave the matter unsettled. Jian Chen and Kaiya fled into the distance quickly. Hold on, where is the fleshly core? Corpses of ancient great apes should have fleshly cores. The fleshly core is gone? Who was it? Who obtained the fleshly core? The fleshly core is the most precious item in the body of an ancient great ape. It's even more valuable than essence blood because it's the energy reserve of ancient great apes. This ancient great ape must have possessed extremely terrifying strength when he was still alive. His fleshly core would be invaluable. At this moment, a series of cries rang out. The peak experts gathered there all look around as they called out. Afterwards, they expanded the senses of their souls in search of the fleshly core's presence. Suddenly, the surroundings changed in color. The entire world became flooded by a blood-red color as a supreme pressure suddenly descended. At that moment, the world darkened as the celestial bodies vanished. The entire desolate plain seemed to become a world soaked in blood. A tremendous sea of blood descended and enveloped the entire place. The sea of blood was terrifying and boundless. No one knew how wide it was. It seemed to possess devastating power. The appearance of the sea of blood caused the expressions of all the primordial realm experts on the desolate plain to change. They became frightened. Even the grand primes who stood at the apex of a plain felt their very souls tremble. Shock filled their faces. This was because in the moment the sea of blood appeared, the laws of the world changed. The sea of blood seemed to replace the world and represent the laws, creating its own laws on the desolate plain. It was like the entire desolate plain had become its territory. As a result, the primordial realm experts, including the peak figures, completely lost control over the laws. Even the abundant origin energy of the desolate plain fled from them, no longer under their control. The blood tier grand exalt. It's the blood tier grand exalt. Why has he come out? The peak experts were all shocked. They felt both frightened and uneasy. Grand exalts were true sovereigns of the world. They were existences like the heavens. With a single thought they could change the operation of the world. They could set down laws of the world. Their powers were limitless. With the personal arrival of the Blood Tier Grand Exalt and the thought of the huge underground cavern, all the peak experts immediately understood that this place was probably connected to the Blood Tier Grand Exalt. Even Gusta's body that they had been fighting over was probably related to the Blood Tier Grand Exalt. As soon as they thought about how they were actually taking something that belonged to the Blood Tier Grand Exalt, all the peak experts present paled. They became frightened and uneasy. Several million kilometers away, Jian Chen became immobilized the moment the Sea of Blood appeared. A terrifying power that he could not resist locked down the world, restraining him. It was not just him. Even Kaya was affected. As a result, the two of them were locked in the posture of flying through the air. They could not move from that position. Jian Chen was shocked. At this moment, he could clearly feel that he seemed to have been reduced to a mortal despite being a great sword immortal. He could not use the laws of the sword. The chaotic force in his dantian had frozen up. His blood had stopped flowing. Even his heart had stopped beating. Time seemed to come to an absolute standstill. The only thing unaffected was his thoughts. Apart from his thoughts, he could not even raise a finger. A bloody mist silently appeared before Jian Chen. The ways of the world resonated around the mist as the laws changed. The bloody mist seemed to be a supreme incarnation of the heavenly ways, enough to reign over everything. At this moment, the mist changed. It condensed into a blurry figure with an unclear, obscured face. Jian Chen immediately like he was being watched, as if a pair of invisible eyes had landed on him. The gaze was extremely terrifying, as if it could peer through all mysteries, including the past and future. Jian Chen immediately felt like all his secrets had been seen through. Even Mo Tianyun's mask was rendered useless. Under the invisible gaze, Jian Chen seemed to hold no secrets. Everything he possessed, the Anatta Tower, the fleshly core, the few strands of profound sword chi in his soul, seemed to be exposed before the gaze. As a matter of fact, the twin swords hidden deep within him were unable to avoid the invisible gaze and were clearly exposed to the pair of eyes. Grand Exalt! Jian Chen's throat became parched as his heart completely sank. Just an invisible gaze had been enough to see through all his secrets. He knew that probably only Grand Exalts, figures of legends, possessed such terrifying ability. Chapter 2384, Blood Tier departs. I never thought I would actually raise the attention of a Grand Exalt. Jian Chen felt utterly powerless as he faced a Grand Exalt. The old master of the twin swords was a terrifying existence who had reached Grand Exalt. Jian Chen deeply understood just how impossibly powerful such experts were. He definitely stood no chance of escaping before someone like that. All of his means, including the Anatta Tower, were like a child's game before a Grand Exalt. As a matter of fact, even if he fused the twin swords regardless of the price and unleashed the might of chaos, he would not be able to even scratch a Grand Exalt. After all, he did not possess the supreme cultivation of the old master of the twin swords, and the swords were not in perfect condition either. The power from the fusion would be affected. Moreover, even if he did want to fuse the swords right now, he completely lacked the power to do so. This was because his body, his blood, all of his comprehension, and powers had been firmly restrained. The only thing that kept moving was his mind. However, Jian Chen failed to realize that at this moment, Kaya's eyes had suddenly become pitch black. The darkness seemed boundless like the starless sky. It was extremely deep. It seemed like a space of endless darkness hid within Kaya's eyes. A gaze flickered from the depths of the dark space. The gaze was extremely cold and emotionless, viewing all lives as ants. It gazed over from afar, looking through the endless darkness. The blurry figure condensed from the sea of blood suddenly pulsed from before Jian Chen. A gaze seemed to appear silently in the figure as well, bearing the same coldness and emotionlessness. It looked down on all people like they were nothing. The gaze that no one was able to sense within the blood-red figure directly stared at Kaya. In the depths of Kaya's eyes, the gaze looked over from far away. It was extremely cold, making eye contact with the Blood Tier Grand Exalt. The Blood Tier Grand Exalt's gaze suddenly narrowed when he saw the gaze in the depths of Kaya's eyes. He glanced at her deeply and said nothing. He just turned around and left. At that moment, the blood-red figure condensed before Jian Chen vanished completely. The boundless sea of blood that enveloped the entire desolate plain disappeared at the same time. The blood tier Grand Exalt had already departed. Immediately, the world cleared up, origin energy began to flow, and the laws of the world started to operate once again. The blood tier Grand Exalt's influence over the desolate plain completely vanished, returning to its usual order. Jian Chen was clearly stunned when he saw the blood-red figure vanish from before him. He became rather confused. He was certain that the sword spirits on him were exposed to the Grand Exalt. In the past, the twin swords had caused much death and injury to the saints' world. He had inherited the twin swords, and he practiced the profound sword Xueqi created by the old master of the twin swords, so he had basically become the next successor already. It should have been impossible for a Grand Exalt to spare him. Despite that, the Grand Exalt just suddenly left. Jian Chen felt that this was very strange, but he could not understand why no matter how he thought about it. However, it clearly was not the time to consider the reason right now. Regardless of why the blood tier Grand Exalt had suddenly departed, escaping this place was his top priority at the moment. Let's go! Jian Chen immediately pulled Kai Ya and fled with lightning speed. All the primordial realm experts elsewhere continued to tremble. Their faces were unnaturally pale as they stood there blankly. They were lost. They had no idea what to do. Although the blood tier Grand Exalt had left, his advent allowed all the peak experts to understand that this mysterious cavern was definitely related to him. Even the many fragments of the ancient great ape might have belonged to the blood tier Grand Exalt. They had actually taken a Grand Exalt's belongings. This filled them all with fright and unease. Even Tu San of the Heaven-Splitting clan felt unsettled. They did not even know whether they should return the remains of Gusta that lay quietly in their space rings. No one dared to take a Grand Exalt's belongings. For a moment, everyone was filled with unease. No one was in the mood to bother about Jian Chen. Elsewhere, Kai Ya and Jian Chen continued to fly. At this moment, Kai Ya suddenly looked at Jian Chen and asked, "Jian Chen, how should we leave the desolate plain?" Jian Chen frowned when he heard this question. After a while of thought, he said, "All the teleportation formations that can take us to other planes on the desolate plain have been sealed up, so it's impossible to escape from those. We can't go to outer space either, since we'll only stand out in outer space. After all, the senses of the peak expert souls have terrifying ranges. As a result, I think the best choice right now is to use an old trick, which is fleeing into a spatial crack and moving through there by relying on the toughness of the Anata Tower. Even peak experts become restrained in spatial cracks. It's impossible for them to possess the Azure Pung King's speed, so it'll be very difficult for them to catch up to us." Jian Chen quickly made up his mind. He did not want to rely on the God clan or the martial soul lineage, so fleeing into a spatial crack was the best idea he could come up with right now. Afterwards, Jian Chen and Kai Ya traveled a little further. Then Jian Chen drew the 9-star sword of heavenly ways to cut open space. Go to the Violet Wind Empire in the southern region. The teleportation formation in their imperial capital can take you away. At this moment, an obscure voice rang out in Jian Chen's head. Jian Chen's eyes narrowed when he heard the voice. He was familiar with it. It was a message from the Celestial Sword Saint. Let's go to the southern region. Jian Chen changed his plans and stowed the 9-star sword of heavenly ways away before immediately hurrying off to the southern region with Kai Ya. His current location was the central region of the desolate plain. Although the central and southern regions were separated by a tremendous distance, there were many regional teleportation formations scattered across the central region. These teleportation formations could only take people between the 5 major regions of the desolate plain and could not take them off the plain. As a result, they had not been sealed up. Jian Chen and Kai Ya arrived in a bustling city nearby. They used the teleportation formation there and left the central region. When they reappeared, they had arrived in the southern region, in the imperial capital of the Violet Wind Empire. Jian Chen immediately looked towards the nearby teleportation formation across plains. However, it had been enveloped by a formation, preventing anyone from using it. Many soldiers stood guard around the teleportation formation. The person who stood out the most was a messy, disheveled old man in old clothes. He lay on a cane chair lazily. Jian Chen could tell with a single glance that the old man was an infinite prime. Right when Jian Chen and Kai Ya appeared from the teleportation formation, the unkempt old man on the cane chair opened his eyes. He produced a soft interjection of surprise and sat up slowly. He stared at Jian Chen with his old eyes and wondered in his heart, Why has this brat come to my place? You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.